to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So you're our first guest this week in our humble little Airbnb podcast studio here.
Love it. Love it.
My 10-year-old son's doing his virtual schoolwork on the other side of that wall over there, and these guys are sitting on the couch making it all happen. So this is great. I'm really looking forward to your conversation with you.
Great. Again, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, certainly. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, who you are, and kind of what you do. I know you've been into quite a lot of things.
Yeah.
But let's kind of give people the a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, I guess overview is, Midwest kid, grew up in St. Louis, moved to D.C. when I was in second grade. My dad is a government consultant, worked for the State Department, building embassies all over the country, or over the world, excuse me. So that was kind of fun. So moved to D.C., middle class family, one of 5 kids, grew up Catholic. So I can talk about that faith journey a little bit too.
Yeah.
Went to UVA undergrad, did finance there, graduated, did a few years in real estate investing, and then moved out to California, went to Stanford for business school. This was 2004, so fun story there is I don't know if you've seen the movie The Social Network.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, there's a subplot in The Social Network about Mark Zuckerberg having to go and find $16,000 or $18,000 to move his buddies from Boston to Silicon Valley because they have to pay rent for this house.
Yes.
And so between first year and second year of business school at Stanford, we rented our house out to Mark Zuckerberg and all of his buddies. And so that was actually our house.
No way.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Your house is in who? You and your family's house? Or
No,
your house?
Me and my buddies at business school rented this house while we were out there. And so we all spread all over the country to do our internships for the summer. And Zuckerberg moved his buddies in that summer. And so that was the house that was in that movie. So it was kind of a fun, I don't know.
That's very cool. Did you have some correspondence with Zuckerberg?
I met him
a
couple times. Yeah,
really?
I met him a couple times. And the really funny story about that is when we got back from our internships, there were receipts for the Ritz-Carlton in New York from Mark Zuckerberg, right? And so I
just in the house, or what?
In the house, yeah, it was in the trash can. And so and there was Facebook business plans all over the place. And so you got to remember this was 2005.
Yeah,
where I think there was 6 or 7 schools. You had to have a .edu email address to be a part of Facebook, right? And so me and my roommates were like, what is this? Like, what is this Facebook company? Like, this is strange, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually, in my business school class, was a guy who was a part of Excel Ventures. Okay. They did one of the first, I think the first institutional round in Facebook. And so I brought in this receipt from Mark Zuckerberg, Ritz-Carlton. I was like, can you believe that they're spending your money on the Ritz-Carlton in New York? And he kind of looked at me. He's like, dude, it's going to be okay. Like,
really?
He knew.
Really? Early on, he
knew Facebook was going to be huge.
Wow. What did you think of it at the time?
Oh, I mean, just thought it was just this little silly company.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in business school, we had our own version of the Facebook, right?
Okay.
And I forget exactly what it was called, but we just didn't think much of it. I mean, how big can it get if you have to have a .edu email address?
Yep.
Right? Not knowing that was just the first step in their scaling of Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And so we make the joke nowadays is like the dumbest financial decision of our entire life was not taking equity in Facebook as opposed to that, I forget what it was, $16,000 or $18,000.
Exactly. Yeah, you should have spotted them some free rent in exchange for equity.
Exactly. So, a bunch of classmates went and did Facebook right after business school and, ended up being the chief revenue officer and head of human resources and things like that of Facebook when it went public. And so they did okay.
Wow, I'm sure they did. Now, was your house the house that was getting trashed and all the parties were in and everything like that in the movie?
Yeah, and I think that the movie, probably exaggerated that a little bit. But we did come back and the landlord was like, the guys that you rented this to were interesting characters. So, yeah, it's a funny, fun little story that you only can get while being in Silicon Valley in 2004, 5, 6, which is one of those crazy periods of time. Right?
Yeah,
Google was taking off, Facebook was starting.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on Zuckerberg stealing that idea? What are your thoughts on that? If you had a little bit more of a front row seat to that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew more than I do. No real thoughts. I mean,
Okay.
it's one of those. It's I think the guys who he quote unquote stole it from got paid off pretty handsomely.
They're fine too.
I think they're okay.
Yeah.
And he was able to execute.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, right? An idea is one thing, the execution is another.
That's oh man.
And
Isn't that the
how many
truth?
people do you
Yep.
hear nowadays? You're like, man, I've got this great idea, and it's like, man, that's a great idea. Now let's go and execute it. Execution is 95%.
Is that what you
of
think?
value creation? I mean, I think so
Yeah,
for sure.
I wouldn't disagree.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey,
So-
and not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
hey, Jonathan, doesn't need to be now, but if in the next few minutes we could find a book around this house or something, this mic is really low. That'd be great to bring it up a little higher. Thank you. All right, so let's pick that story back up there.
Yeah, so we came back from business school or from our internship, and second year business school, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life, right? You had fun in the first year. The second year, he's like, okay, what am I going to go do now that I've paid $150,000 to be at this school for the last 2 years, right? And while a bunch of my buddies were doing the Google and the Facebook thing, tech was taking off. My roommate and I decided we wanted to do something a little bit different. Walk down the road untraveled a little bit. And so we went out and did what is called a search fund. And a search fund is when you go out to a bunch of investors and say, hey, give me a little bit of money to find a company to buy. So we raised, I think it was $600,000. And that was going
This is straight out of school.
straight out of school.
Okay, so you're how old at this point?
28.
You're 28
at
okay.
the time.
And this is in when 05?
This is 06.
06?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, man.
Yep. So we raised $600,000. We went out and moved to Chicago from Silicon Valley. Buddy was from Chicago. My family, like I said, is from St. Louis. I had 4 grandparents still alive. They were in the 80s at the time. I wanted to be close to them. You just never know, how much time you have with your grandparents,
Right.
and they meant a lot to me. So wanted to be close to them. So we moved to Chicago to find a company. Ended up finding a company in Dayton, Ohio, of all places. Never thought I'd be going from Silicon Valley to Chicago to Dayton, Ohio.
Right. Keeping it classy and
Then exactly, and then go Flyers, I guess, is the team there. And so moved to Dayton, Ohio. First had to raise the money to buy the company, so we went back to our investors and said, "Hey, I need $7 million to buy this company." Bought that company, moved to Dayton, ran that for about 7 years, and sold it to a private equity firm for well over $100 million. So
Wow.
it was just an incredible run for those 7 years.
Man,
So
no kidding.
yeah.
Was that VRI?
that was VRI. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
VRI.
So when you identified this company you wanted to buy in Dayton, you had investors at this point basically just believed in you guys?
Yeah,
You and your partners?
Sure. It's one of those things where Chris Hendrickson was my business partner, had very complementary skills. I was the external guy. He was the internal guy. He was operations. I was sales. So we had a complementary skill set with a really great company. And so, we just, we jumped on a really fast horse and just switched out jockeys, and that's
Okay.
basically what we were doing, right? Is
Okay.
we bought it from the founder of the company, and we just, ran a really, really good horse really fast for 6 or 7 years. So
Yeah.
it was a really, really, really good time. And I would say that, one of the things that made us successful is it was a service that we were super passionate about. Is an I fall and I can't get up button, which I don't know if you've seen the internet commercials or commercials at all. It's a button for old people so that if they fall in their home, they can press it.
I
and
have
get
seen
help.
a commercial like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was you guys?
So it wasn't us, but we were a competitor of theirs.
Okay.
And so that's how we initially found that company. It was, I think it was a late night at the bars in Chicago, came home, was watching TV, saw this silly commercial. I was like, man, that is silly, And then you started thinking about it. I was like, wow, this is a service that the elderly need,
Yes.
because many of them live alone or want to live alone. And so again, my grandparents having an influence on my house or my life, was one of those reasons. I was like, man, yeah, grandma and grandpa should have this, right? And the aging population is growing. Is a recurring revenue business, so you're paying $30 to $40 a month. So great business model. And so let's go take a look at it. So reached out to about 10 companies that were doing this and found one in Dayton, Ohio. So,
Oh, okay. You saw this commercial before you
Yeah.
knew about VRI. Before you, I see.
yeah.
That
yeah.
was sort of the spark to get you
was the
into
spark.
this particular industry.
Yeah.
Were you thinking when you guys were out looking for companies? Were you looking for companies in healthcare space in particular, or no?
That was one of them. That was
Okay.
one of them. I mean, I think we wanted to find a company that would impact people directly.
Okay. Yep.
That's where our heart was. Is how can we get pumped about a company? You don't work your tail off for a company unless you really care about the mission of the company. At least that was for us. And so we just wanted to find something that we were mission aligned. And this is one where, man, if we could help the elderly, live in their homes longer.
Yep.
Man, what a great mission that would be.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
yeah, so we got into that company, and it started off as just a press of a button, and we were like, "Hey, we're taking our average customer was 82 years old, who had 2 or 3 comorbidities, which means 2 or 3 other conditions that needed medical assistance. So they had diabetes or hypertension or congestive heart failure. And so, what happens if we take that little device and start monitoring your blood pressure or monitoring your blood sugars out of the home?" Right. And so
Is this before Fitbits and Apple Watches and all that stuff?
Fitbits and Apple Watches. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So then we started monitoring all of those things out of your home so that we could actually tell your health plan or your Medicaid agency or whoever it may be how well you're doing, better than just they fell. Right.
Sure.
Let's get to them before they fall. And so that's where we saw a lot of growth, is monitoring other pieces of information out of the home other than just the reactive fall.
Okay.
If you fall and you go to the hospital, it's 14 to 20 grand like that.
Really?
Right. And so what happens if we can keep you out of the hospital?
Right.
Right. That's where the cost savings are.
Yep.
So that's what we got into, and that took off, and so sold the company in 2014.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah, for sure. Praise God. Well, yeah. I want to hear a little bit more about VRI, but let's keep going through the overview.
Yeah.
So that's 2014. And by the way, at what point in here did you meet your wife, and where does your family tie into all of this?
Yeah. So met my wife in Ohio.
Because of moving there from VRI?
All from moving there from VRI.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Met her in Ohio. The funny story about that is we met on Match.com. There it is. It's public.
I'll say this. You might be surprised how many people have been on this podcast that secretly were that mentioned that they've met online.
And this was
It's
2010. This was 2010.
I have to feel like it was a lot less popular in 2010.
It was a lot less popular. And there were, for sure, was this stigma to meeting people online in 2010.
I believe it. Yeah. Do you think that stigma still exists, or do you think it's going away?
So.
I think it's going away.
I think it's going away.
Yeah.
I think you hear it all the time now, right?
Yeah.
And so, back in 2000, and we actually, I hate to say this, but we lied to our family for for the first 7 or 8 years of our relationship. Like we were kind of like telling them a kind of story. We met at a restaurant, and we, so it wasn't like a
after you both agreed
lie.
to come to this restaurant at the same time.
We just happened to meet at a restaurant, and so it wasn't blatant. It was just not the whole story. And so finally, we finally told them, and they're
So
like,
it was
what?
Yeah. So it was that particular or that peculiar at that time to meet online that you did not convey that to your family.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
Totally. So not even some of our friends didn't even know until a few years ago.
Wow.
I mean, you're married. We have kids now. It's like who cares?
Exactly.
At this point, who cares?
Yeah. What was it about her profile that caught your eye?
Oh, it's a funny story, man. Here we go. We're getting into the details. Funny story is, since I was running the company, we had, I don't know, maybe 100 employees at the time. I did not have my picture up, which is like a no-no of online
I would
dating,
think.
right?
Yeah.
And so she was with her.
It's a no-no on Twitter, let alone online dating.
Right. So I didn't have my picture up because I didn't want my employees seeing it, and that's being spread around. Like, I was really embarrassed about being on Match.com, clearly. And so we didn't have a picture, and so I emailed her, and it must have been a really great, or I messaged her via Match, and it must have been a great message, because she was on her way back from 4th of July weekend in the Outer Banks, which is where you go if you're from Ohio to go to the beach, the Outer Banks, North Carolina. And she was on the last day of her free subscription to Match.com. And so she was just rolling through these things. And I had done a mission trip in Africa. She had done a mission trip in Africa. I mentioned that. She had mentioned it in her profile. I said, hey, it's really cool. We both done mission trips in Africa, and Africa is one of my loves, and I just feel one with God when I'm in Africa, right? Just one of those things. And it was so compelling to her that she's like, hey, you don't have a profile picture up. Like, you got to send me pictures. Like, here's my Gmail account. Send me pictures, and I might respond, right? So I sent her pictures, and she responded.
Oh, that's good.
I had hair back then, so if the audience gets one thing taken away, and I tell this to my nephews, I was like, hey, you got to lock it down before you lose your hair. I mean, that's one of the things. Just lock it down before you lose your hair. So
that look right there is pretty good.
Yeah, hey, it's all right.
Absolutely.
I've been blessed with an okay head. You too. I mean, we're doing the same style. You have a lot more hair than I do.
Yeah. So 2010, you met her then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then when did you guys get married?
We got married in 2016.
Okay. And did you guys both grow up in church?
What am I saying? We did not get married in 2016. We got married in 2014.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, I was starting to do the math at 6 years. I'm like, hey, you guys dated for quite a while.
Can you edit that out? Can somebody edit that out? So my wife doesn't even
once again. For the sake of his wife.
Don't ask my anniversary actual date, because no.
So dating this entire time? You guys were dating?
Yeah,
you were
dating.
You were living and dating.
Did the dating broke up.
Oh, you did?
Kind of thing. Oh yeah. 4 times she took me back.
No way.
And it kind of flows in my faith journey. I was not a believer at the time.
Okay.
Like I said, I grew up Catholic. I kind of did the follow the rules Catholicism. Couldn't really say that I believed in Jesus and him dying for my sins.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was through Steph that I became truly a believer. She was going to a great church in Cincinnati called Crossroads. Came to know Jesus and got baptized when I was 33, so a little bit late to being baptized. And then we got married when I was 34. So that's kind of the whole story. There's
how old are you now?
I'm 41.
41.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. So VRI 2014 sold it. Mm-hmm. Coincidentally, that's the year you got married.
Yes.
What a year for you!
It was a great year.
How does that feel to sell a company for $100 million or over $100 million?
I think it's something in our just being male is the hunt is actually way more fun than the capture, right? And I don't know if it goes back to our early days hunting lions or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that hunt is just so much fun, and then it happens, and then you're kind of like, oh, all right. And I wish I could, say that it was like when the money hit the bank, you're like, whoa, but it was at that point that you're like, wow, that's over. That part of my life is over, and it's like, what do I do now? And so I will tell you that, like, after selling the company, and we can kind of get into my, having my daughter and things like that, it was a hard time. Like, you come away from that being like, okay, what is my purpose in life now that you've run so hard for a pretty decent amount of time, 6.5 years, and now you're like, what now?
Yeah.
What now? And you try to fill your time up with stuff, right? And that's where you kind of get a little bit lost. So
do you sell for cash or equity in whoever purchased you?
Cash.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had some decent. Obviously, you had a partner and you had investors, but still, you had a decent amount of money hitting your account.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it I would say the best part of that, it just allows you to step back and say, okay, I don't have to go do something that I really don't want to do right now. I can go do and be, pretty picky about what I want to do. And so that actually happened in 2014. It was negative 12 degrees the day we sold the company. It was a polar vortex is what they call it in the Midwest. It's like all of this, cold air comes down from Canada and just sits over the Midwest, and it's miserable. Like, it's, you could throw the water off the balcony and snow by the time it hits the ground. It's awful. And so my wife and I were like, it was the day that we realized that God did not intend people to live in Ohio in winter. I'm sorry.
I totally agree. I just said this the other day to Andrew.
It's incredible. Like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? So we were like, okay, we're just going to head south, and I thought I was going to do something entrepreneurial again. And so Austin seemed like a really good place to land. And we thought we were going to enjoy, breakfast tacos and, hippies and live music. And I'm an outdoors guy, so I love fishing.
Okay.
And so we thought we were going to do that. And my wife got, and I joke, maybe we had a little bit too much fun because my wife got pregnant right away.
Okay.
And so
With your first child?
with our first. Yeah.
Okay. After you moved to Austin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you moved in 2014 already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Moved in 2014. She got pregnant in, I'm going to screw up the dates, but we had our 12, so she must have got pregnant in like August.
Okay.
And then we had our 20-week ultrasound and found out that our daughter had a fatal condition. So you walk in and, doctor says, hey, not viable with life, terminate and try again. And so, we're looking at this 20-week ultrasound. You have kids, clearly you mentioned that earlier. And it's 20-week ultrasound is, you can see 10 fingers and 10 toes, and she was, moving her mouth and she was twirling around. And so we were like, that looks like a human being to us, and kind of our faith. We were like, hey, we're going to give her life in whatever way God intends that life to look. And so, doctor said, okay, probably going to die in utero. If she makes it to the birth canal, going to die in the birth canal. If she makes it out of the birth canal, she's going to take a breath or two and pass away. Well, Grace is her name, lived for 10 and a half hours before she passed away.
Wow.
And so we kind of came out of that and was like, all right, Lord, what are you going to do with this? How you going to Romans 8:28 this one?
Right.
How are you going to work this one for good? And my wife immediately realized there just weren't any resources for women who were walking through that journey, because 85 to 90% of those babies are terminated. They take the advice of their doctors and they terminate those pregnancies. And so she started a nonprofit called caringtoterm.org, which is just a resources for women and doctors.
Carrying
to term.org.
Okay.
And so she gets about 3,000 women every month hitting that website looking for resources. So
She's still doing that? Wow.
yeah.
How many weeks was at what week was the baby born? Was Grace born?
39 and 3 days. So
okay, so full
almost
Pretty
made it
much,
to full
right?
term. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's full term. I guess 38 weeks is considered, or 34 weeks is considered full term, something like that. But yeah, almost made it to full 40 weeks. And so
was the condition a heart condition or
brain? The top of her skull did not close properly.
I see.
And so the amniotic fluid basically eats away at your brain until there's not enough to function. So,
but you had it for 10 and a half hours.
10 and a half hours.
Yeah.
10 and a half hours, which was an incredible spiritual experience.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Do you have the baby and then you just hold Grace knowing that you're not going to have her very long, most likely? Mm-hmm. You're still praying for a miracle?
Still praying for a miracle. At that point, I think you see her, you see what happened. You know what the outcome is most likely going to be. I mean, we were praying for a miracle the entire time, and some of the best prayers that you think are unanswered are answered in ways that you don't anticipate, right? And so, happy to talk a little bit about how Grace has impacted our lives, because
I'd love to hear
it
that.
has been a massive impact for sure.
I'm sure. But the other thing that stands out to me is this is happening within, I don't know, 6, 8, 9, 10 months of you moving to Austin. So you're new here. So presumably you don't have strong community yet. So what was the community like around you?
Very little.
Okay.
Very little. Yeah, we were married in July, and then Grace was born the following May. So yeah, we were less than a year married when we lost her. So it's a pretty rough start to marriage, and that's within a little over about a year worth of time from when we moved to Austin too. So I mean, it's just, we didn't have community. We hadn't really kind of gotten into we were still church hopping a little bit, trying to find the right church in town. So we just dug in for what ended up being a year and a half or 2 years.
So over a year's time, you sold VRI, you got married, you got pregnant with your first child. Your first child died. You moved to a new city. Holy cow, man!
It's like, what else can you throw in there?
Exactly. How was that season of life?
Oh man, it was. Was it? Yeah, I mean, it was for sure the most difficult season of life that I've ever been in. Clearly, I mean, there is a indescribable grief when you see your daughter, your child, take her last breath, right? I mean, that is just something that you can't even via a podcast describe, because it is, you know, the darkness of those following days is very, very real, very, very real, you know. And so my heart goes out to all those families, or, you know, dads and moms who've lost kids, because it's just a darkness. That I only, you know, like as you've heard, I'm a man of faith, and so only I feel like the Lord can lift, you know.
Yeah.
And so there was about a 2-year period of time there where we were fighting for our marriage, because clearly, you know, men and women grieve very differently.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, if that had a negative effect on your marriage.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was awful. We had an awful marriage for about 18 months to 2 years. I mean, you know, 18 months for sure, and you can probably say 2 years, right?
Just dealing with the pain.
The pain, and you know, it's as guys, I'm generalizing here. Let me just say, for me as a guy, I internalized that pain, so I didn't talk a lot about it, which to my wife seemed like I didn't care, you know, as much, where I cared just as much as I was just dealing with it, where she was an external processor.
Yes.
Right. And then the other thing too with grief is you become very selfish. It's all about me, right? It's all about my feelings and how I'm feeling right now, because you know, I don't have time to think about your feelings.
Sure.
Dude, I just lost a child. Like, give me a break with your, you know, BS issue that you're dealing with at work, right?
Yes.
And so it becomes all about you. You know, it's a very selfish thing. And so that's one of the things that we just had to realize and get over. And so in marriage, which is one of the most selfless, you know, relationships that you should have, you become all about yourself as opposed to as the other person. So it was a tough period of time, but you know, again, praise God that we got out of that. And I think our marriage is stronger today as a result of going through that than it would have otherwise been.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear that's one of the outcomes in time. One of the positive outcomes in time is the stronger marriage through going through that, and ultimately it didn't drive you apart. But this thing of you just mentioned it in passing, and I have friends that have also lost a child, and it is hard for a parent. I'm just kind of referring to their instance, and you just mentioned it. If you've lost a child, you know what deep, actual, real, painful, searing hurt and loss and suffering feels like. And then when you have parents that get, say, so caught up in how their child, you know, maybe has a fever and they're just losing their mind because it might be COVID or things like that, like much, much, much lesser things, and those parents are just kind of like making a huge deal about it, it can be hard for them to deal with it, because it's like, all right, your problem is your child has a fever. How about losing a child? You know what I mean? And you're kind of touching on that with being at work, and like people have other issues, but you'd work through a much bigger issue, so to speak, or much greater pain, right? Is that something that just eventually you sort of work through and don't hold that against other people when they're having difficulty too, but it's nowhere near the extent of hurt that you went through? Is that something that kind of heals over time and you develop a little bit more empathy for other people's much smaller problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, once you have kids, we've been blessed with 2 more girls, so we've got, you know, 3 girls, 1 heavenly, and two here on earth. I think that as we see ourselves battling the same issues that all of our, you know, friends battle, there's easy to have empathy over the fever,
Sure.
you know, over the temper tantrum, right? Which we're
Yep.
dealing with our 2-year-old right now, right? Like,
Yep.
and so it's easier to get to empathy. And I don't think we ever got to that place of being like, hey, you know, other than maybe that year and a half that I talked about just after, we never were at that place of like, hey, dude, cry me a river,
Right.
Because your issue is real, right? Our issue is real, and I do think that the pain of losing Grace and the year and a half of struggling with that in our marriage and things have created some perseverance.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, you know, that's a biblical thing, right? Like,
Yes.
you know, praise God for all of the pain, because it creates perseverance, and ultimately that allows you to look a lot more like Christ, right?
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think on the one side you have, say on your side you have that empathy piece, but on the other side, and I think this is the much, much bigger piece, you have this perspective. So if I'm a parent that has not lost a child and I'm getting, you know, look, I don't like when any of our kids get fevers. So, I mean, this is just an example here. We could pick other examples like this, like your kid not getting on a baseball team or whatever it is. Look, you're looking out for your children. I get that you don't like that they have a fever, but I think there is a lesson there on perspective when you're a parent and you realize that, yeah, my child's going through something right now, but it could be very short term. It could be very minor. It's just kids get sick, right? So he has a fever, but I have my child and he's not about to die. Like, there's that perspective on the other side of the aisle too, where I think that's where a lot of learning needs to happen. And I think it depends on the parents. Look, plenty of parents are super mature and they handle that with grace. And then there's also some parents out there, let's just be honest, that are pretty immature and they fly off the handle anytime anything tends to go a little bit wrong with any of their children. It's like, man, take a breath. Like, this is parenting, like what you're dealing with is really not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, look, I think children reveal selfishness in ourselves, right? I mean, it's just from my perspective, and I'm still a super selfish human being. We all are. We're all broken, right? And so anytime that my daughters go cuckoo, right, which is pretty often, they're 2 and 4.
Okay.
It's like I got to look at it from the perspective of saying, okay, I'm getting fed up with my daughters because what I want to do is more important than what they're going through, right? And so that is just a revealing of selfishness in me, and so that's the way that I can look at it. And is that, I don't know, view because we lost grace and because we are now, hyper focused on like how are we selfish human beings? Yeah, maybe. But praise God for kids, because I do think they reveal a selfishness in us, which is a core sin.
Yes.
Selfishness. Maybe it looks like pride. Maybe it looks like other things. But I mean, that is the core of all of our sinful behavior, from my perspective, is selfishness. It's about us.
Yep.
And so, anytime I get pissed off at my daughter, it's probably more to deal with me than it is to deal with her. She's 2.
Yep. Right.
I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
She's 2. She's gonna have a temper tantrum.
Yep.
But somehow we make it about us. Like,
you're right. You're right. You're totally right. And that's convicting to me too, because I can parent out of a selfish desire much too often. I find myself where it's like I'm asking that child to change their behavior so that it's easy. It makes my day easier.
Yeah.
And it's not about growing them or developing them or having a learning moment with them. It's just stop doing that, because right now you're an obstacle to what I'm trying to get done or to my happiness, and that's just not a good way to parent. But
it's true.
Yeah, selfishness is probably one of my top sins for sure. You mentioned some learnings and just with life and everything from losing grace. Did we cover that, or is there more there you want to touch on?
No, I mean, I think that I'll share with you a couple of specific examples of where I think as you go through something like this, in someone's faith journey, it can derail your faith journey, or can strengthen your faith journey. And praise God, we've had several situations in which we felt like the Lord was tapping us and being like, hey, I know this is really, really hard, but I'm here. And I'll give you just a couple very real examples, and some of your listeners may think I'm cuckoo for telling these, but I think they're very, very real. So the couple days after we got back from the hospital, which were most difficult days, right? You're leaving the hospital without a baby, right? You go in with a baby, you leave without a baby. I mean, can you imagine? You just said your son is handing your son over or whoever to a nurse, knowing that you will never see him again.
Yep.
Right. Like, that is one of the most painful things. And so we went home, and the enemy, I feel like, got into our brains and was like, we were asking each other, it's like, did we tell Grace that we loved her enough? I mean, like, what an awful question that is. Like, does she know how much we loved her? And we just bawled over that, And I went to bed that night, and I had this dream where I was Grace, looking up at me and Steph, and just being flooded with the greatest emotion of love, or the greatest feeling of love that I've ever felt in my entire life.
Wow.
And I'm just like, if you weren't a believer, you didn't believe that we have a creator, you could say, oh, that was just the body's way of adapting, right? For me, it was like the Lord was like, hey, she felt your love, and even more than that, she's feeling my love in heaven, right? Like that feeling of love. Like I said, I've never ever felt anything like it.
Just being saturated in love.
Saturated from head to toe of just feeling total love. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Lord.
This is the first night after you got back from the hospital?
Second night. Wow. Second night.
Man, what a gift from God.
Yeah, and I think the Lord can talk to us in dreams. You know? I mean, I think Joseph was the one that heard in the dream, like, yeah, no, take Mary. You know, like there's something good going on here, right?
Yep.
I'm not a theologian, but I'm pretty sure it was a dream.
Yep.
You know, and then interestingly, you know, a couple weeks later, we had a pastor tell us, stupid pastor, I won't name the name, say, hey, there's nothing biblically that says that grace is in heaven.
Uh-oh.
And so you think about this, right? And you're like, you have grieving parents who their 1 ounce of hope is like, our daughter is with Jesus. Right. And now you have a pastor who says, there's nothing biblically that says babies go to heaven, which devastated us, as you can imagine.
Why would he say this?
Because he's stupid.
Huh.
And so Steph had a dream that night that she was looking through a two-way window where she was on one side, you know, two-way mirror, where they have a reflective side and a non-reflective side, but you could see through it, right? Yep. So Grace was on the reflective side and Steph was on the non-reflective side, and she could see Grace healed as a teenager, just beautiful, you know, in the most beautiful place. You know, it's like, I was like, that to me is like the Lord being like, I'm with you. I got you.
Yep.
You know, I will comfort you.
Yes.
Through this most difficult period of time.
Yep.
And I'm not sure what we would have done without those, right? Mm-hmm. And so those were real, tangible things that I felt like we heard from the Lord that got us through the most difficult time in our life. So
wow. Yeah, praise God for that. Wow, man, what a gift, seriously. And at this point, how long have you been a believer?
Man, I became a believer in 33. So I was probably 35, 36, so 2 or 3 years in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we lost Grace in 2015, and so this was 2015. Yeah, so I was 36.
Okay. Did this experience rock your faith, or did it strengthen it?
Strengthened it for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, just you got to lean. We leaned in. We leaned into our faith, and we go to the Austin Stone here in Austin.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And Matt Carter, who was the senior pastor at the time, was walking through 1 Peter, which is all about just having really hard things happen and how the Lord uses those to strengthen you, right? And so we just felt like, again, that was like the Lord giving us like the perfect message in our journey. Soon after losing Grace, it was like, hey, He's going to use this pain for good, right? And I think He did. I think He did.
Yeah. How soon after Grace's death did you wind up at Austin Stone?
Very soon after.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly what the timing was, but I think
You've been there since?
We've been there ever since. Yeah.
That is one of the things that I think is unique to a church. Is you minister to so many different types of people and people from so many different backgrounds and experiences and wins and losses and good times and bad times and suffering and victories. They all come together, to this church a few times a week or one time a week or whatever, and the ability for the gospel message to go out and be preached to like all these different types of people and experiences, and to like for that to bring hope and healing and a depth of faith to those people. I mean, because I'm just picturing you're coming to the Stone with your experience, but there's people there that have not had loss of any kind, and the gospel message is equally valuable to both, to all.
Absolutely.
It's just one of the, I think that's such a great thing about the local church is, so I'm happy the good ones, right? Because there are some churches that are not so great.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of hurt that comes out of that. So, how soon after then Grace's death did you have your next daughter?
So Grace passed away in May of 15, got pregnant in November of 15 with Ava.
Oh, you have an Ava.
We have an Ava.
We have an Ava.
Oh, it's a good name.
It's a great name.
Yeah, easy to spell. She's got it down.
Ours too. Our Ava is 6 now. So yours
Okay.
is 4, you said?
4.
Okay. Yep. And then what's the name of your youngest?
Caroline.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Caroline is 2.
Grace, Ava, and Caroline. Oh, you have nice names. I like all of those names.
An Ava Grace and a Caroline Grace. So they're both middle names are after their
really?
big sister.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so how about then going back to selling VRI? What do you do in the weeks or months following? Now, I suspect having the your experience with Grace and everything, that came right on the heels of selling VRI, correct? So that probably affected that. But what was your plan kind of from a business side or career? Were you planning to take a few months off, a couple of years off? What was your plan there?
Yeah,
And then what did you do?
I'm an Enneagram 8, so I don't know if you're into Enneagrams, but an Enneagram
I know a little bit.
8 is
They're the bulldozers, right?
They're the
They can be?
bulldozers,
Okay.
right? They are drivers. They want to get stuff done, so I cannot sit at home and twiddle my thumbs.
Yeah.
It's just not very good. I'm not very good at that.
Yeah.
And so I had to go and do something else. So I actually stuck around with VRI for about a year and a half. So I sold it in 14. Stuck around for about a year and a half. We lost Grace, and I was just like, hey, guys, I got to transition out. So I ended up transitioning out in 2016. And then did some just private investing, helping some smaller companies try to scale. So did that for about a year. And then I was listening to Andy Stanley at the end of 16. Let's see, end of 16. Yeah, he said... forget about New Year's resolutions because we all forget about them by January 7th anyway. So what breaks your heart? And to me, the fact that we lose 1 million babies to abortion every year breaks my heart. And that's what I felt like the Spirit put on my heart. And many of them are like Grace. Like I said, 85 to 90% of babies like Grace are terminated. And so he's like, okay, what are you going to go do about it? Right. And make that, what you think about this New Year's. What breaks your heart and what are you going to go do about it? And so I was like, all right, Lord, like, what am I going to do about it? I don't know. Well, the next day, a member of the board of directors at the local pregnancy center here in Austin called Austin Life Care reached out to me and said, hey, the executive director stepped down yesterday. Are you at all, I know this is out of left field, but are you at all interested in this job? And I'm like, oh, geez. Like a pregnancy center, for those who don't know, or for women who have unplanned pregnancies, they can go, one of two places. They can go to Planned Parenthood, or they, or an equivalent, or they can go to a pregnancy center, which is basically a place where they try to help you walk through that decision journey, right? And so this was a tiny little organization here in Austin, and I'm like, come on, Lord, like I just ran a company where 350 employees. Like I'm better than this. Come on, And it was very, very clear after I fought him for a couple of weeks. It was like, no, this is what I want you to do. And so I joined Life Care in March of 17. I went into this as kind of a goal or originally it was like, hey, I'm just interim, executive director here of this little nonprofit because I'm a guy. I don't know the first thing about, unplanned pregnancies, like pregnancies in general. Like I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff. So what do you want me to do here? But as I went in, I MBA'd it a little bit and said, okay, there are 3,500 of these pregnancy centers throughout the country. There are 350 Planned Parenthoods that do abortions. So there are 10 times the number of pregnancy centers that there are Planned Parenthoods who do abortions, right? Yet only 2% of women with unplanned pregnancies will go to a pregnancy center, while the other 97 or 98% will go to an abortion clinic.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, why, if we have so many more locations, are we only having like a 2 or 3% market share? Right. And so I invited all the other pregnancy centers to my house. I said, there's 7 other ones in Austin. I said, hey, come to my house. Let's talk about this. Like, let's pray together. Let's talk about what's working, what's not working. How can we work together? And of the 7, 1 said yes, 3 said no, and the others didn't respond. And I'm like, wow. The enemy's
to
doing
even come to your house to
even
talk?
come to my house to talk.
Whoa.
I was going to feed them a good steak dinner and everything.
Right.
Right. You know, and I invited their spouses. And so I was like, you know, the enemy is doing a very good job of keeping us fragmented, right? Because if you bring those 3,500 together and act as one, you could really have an impact on abortions in this country. And so,
Why do you think they said no or didn't respond? Is there a sort of this feeling of competition?
yeah, there is. Yeah, you know, it's one of those weird things, right, where you have to have you have donors, right? You don't want anybody stealing your donors, and so somebody else new coming in just that might steal your donors. I think there's a fear there,
Wow.
of their donors being stolen.
Yeah, that's surprising to me.
Yeah, it's a strange thing in nonprofit ministry world, and we can talk about that a little bit too.
It's just sort of like the idea is I'm doing my thing. I have my clients or customers, so to speak, the people I'm helping. Mm-hmm. I have my donors. This is my little mission here, and please don't interfere with that. And I don't really need to go learn what you're doing because, like what we're doing, it's sort of we have something going. Like that's kind of the mindset. Mm-hmm. Oh wow.
You know, whereas I feel like we as believers need to have an abundance mentality.
Of course, yeah.
Right, which is like the Lord is in control. He is sovereign. And so let's just do what's best for the kingdom as opposed to best what's for our little organization.
Yes.
Right. And what you said, I think, is totally right. It's just like, this is our organization. Right. And in reality, you should be open handed with this and said, no, this is God's organization. Let's do what's best to glorify him in everything that we do.
Yep. Are most of the pregnancy centers, are they sort of like evangelical Christians that are running them?
Mostly evangelical, and I think
Catholics into
there's
it some too?
couple, yeah.
Okay.
So in Austin, there's a couple Catholic ones as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Is that mostly it though, or like are there like I don't know other types of faiths like Mormons or anything that have these
Not
types
that
of
I
things?
know.
as well?
I mean, I'm sure there are some out there, but I don't. It's not a big percentage.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, oh wow, you know, these pregnancy centers in Austin don't want to talk to me, and so why don't I go to San Antonio and Houston and Dallas? And I did that and found a group in San Antonio, a group in Houston, and a group in Dallas who wanted to all work together under one brand so that we could really build a statewide alternative to Planned Parenthood for these women. So that was the vision. Roe v. Wade, which was the big Supreme Court case that legalized abortion back in 1973, started in Texas, in Austin, actually. And so, you know, we thought that planting the seed here in Texas and Austin specifically to have a real alternative was providential, you know. And so, you know, we did that. I've been running that for the last almost 4 years, and then that ended last month, October.
Yeah.
Or no, 2 months ago, October.
Do you find someone else that you feel good about leading that?
Not yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what are they doing?
I don't know.
There's
To be full transparency, and I'm not sure how much of this is going to air. I was let go.
Okay.
And it was a clash of entrepreneurship versus nonprofit. I mean, if you think about the management spectrum, the way that you manage organizations, right? Nonprofit is on one side and entrepreneurship is on the other side.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think just the style, entrepreneurial style, just did not resonate with the nonprofit way of life.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to talk more about nonprofit versus for-profit, but I'm curious with your time there. All right, so I'm curious what you learned, or if we could hear a little bit more about abortions, because I don't know a lot about that.
Sure.
You mentioned 1 million abortions a year. Why are you laughing?
No, I'm just saying it's like, I'm not sure on your podcast, like abortion was like the number one thing that we wanted to talk about, but I'm happy to go there.
I'm happy to, because here, let me tell you why. I've had 2 people. Okay, here's the thing. I don't know why this is, but for whatever reason, sometimes abortion and kind of social justice issues, like racial reconciliation, those issues are pitted against each other. I'm not sure why, but this has come up twice now where someone has asked me, because we've talked about social justice issues on this podcast a few times, and back in April and May, I mean, there was, I don't know, 2 or 3 people in particular that came on, and we spent a lot of time talking about it with everything that was going on in the country. And twice this summer, I've had people ask me specifically, okay, but how many times have you talked about abortion? And it caught me off guard a little bit. And I was like, We haven't dove into abortion, I guess, yet at all. Like, we haven't had a podcast on abortion. And why did you ask that? You know what I mean? It's like, well, what are you getting at? Like, and I think where they were coming from is like, hey, man, you're talking about kind of this racial reconciliation topic. Why are you not equally talking about, I guess, abortion at the same time or at the same amount? I don't know. For whatever reason, these things are somewhat pitted against each other. I really don't know why that is.
I get it, because I've gone there before, and I was like, okay, so we've got big societal issues, right? And I think, if you think abortion is the killing of a human being, right? That is a big societal issue.
Yes, that's what it is. Yep.
Right. And so, some of the racial injustice things, big societal issue.
Yes.
So if we're talking about this big societal issue, why aren't we talking about this big societal issue?
Yes, that's exactly where they're coming from.
And that's where they're coming from.
And I kind of understand that.
Yeah.
So all that to say, I don't know a lot about abortion, like how prevalent. I know that they don't need to turn in their numbers, right? That's my understanding. But you mentioned there's 1 million abortions a year
About 1
in
million,
this country.
just under 1 billion. Yeah.
Just under 1 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, for me, I take a little bit of a different approach on this, a little bit more of a pragmatic approach, because I think, we get so caught up in our right versus left political stances, right? That my big frustration is there's a lot of us in the middle who are like, hey, we can have a conversation about this without hating each other.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
And let's talk about, you just talked about social justice, which I think that pits the left against the right? Let's talk about abortion, which definitely pits the left against the right?
Yeah.
And so the way that I look at this is saying, listen, I think most of us can agree, right, that abortion is not something we should go and party about, right? Let's not celebrate it. Like, you are performing a medical procedure that costs money, right, that has been shown to have negative psychological outcomes, and to some, including myself, I'll put myself in this camp, kill a human being, right? So whether you think it's bad financially for women who tend to be poor, right, or more, lean, more poor, or have psychological conditions, or kill a human being, let's all agree that abortion is probably not a great thing, right? And so why don't we take up an approach of saying, one, how do we reduce unplanned pregnancies, right? That, for me, is where the evangelical group has come against me specifically, because I think the best way to do that is put women who have a high risk of an abortion on birth control. And so the evangelicals are telling me, like, hey, that is bad because you are now telling them that sex outside of marriage is okay. Right? And I'm saying, no, they're coming to us because they're having sex. Right? And so how do we reduce the risks of that? Abortion, killing the human being. If you really think a human being is going to be killed, let's keep a human being from getting killed. Let's put them on contraception, and then lead them back to a more biblical view of sex, right? I haven't seen anybody take a biblical view of sex who doesn't believe as Jesus is their savior. I mean, you don't start with, hey, I'm not going to have sex outside of marriage, and then get to a place of saying, I believe that Jesus is my savior. You start with believe that Jesus is my savior, then you come back and say, oh, you know what? Maybe sex within the marital context is the best way of having it, right? And so it's like, let's care for them where they are. If hopefully they'll accept Jesus because that's what we want, right? And they'll then move back to a more biblical view of sex. That, to me, is the best way of doing this.
That makes all kinds of sense. And is the pushback on that this sort of idealistic view where, no, we don't want you to abort your baby and we don't want you to be having sex outside of marriage, and we're just not willing to, quote unquote, compromise and give you a safe way to have sex outside of marriage. Exactly. In the meantime, while we still work on kind of changing your heart and giving you some information and ideas why that might be a bad thing to be doing for your sake and so forth. And there's just sort of this almost, I just pictured kind of like this idealistic view that we don't want you to have an abortion. We also don't want you to have sex outside of marriage. And so we're just not willing to have contraception kind of be part of the discussion. Is that kind of the thinking there?
Right.
Okay.
Which we think
that's kind of dangerous because it's like, this is what we want, but is it really plausible? You know what I mean? Is that kind of viewpoint, is that really workable in society, I guess? I'm coming back around. I agree with your viewpoint.
is
the idea that we can just get people to stop having sex.
Yeah, it's not. That's
it's
not going to happen.
That's not. It's great. You can have this idea. You can have this ideal, but it's really not that plausible, right? I mean,
yeah, it's not plausible.
Yep.
Unless you believe in Jesus, you're not going to go to a biblical view of sex. It's just not going to happen.
Yep.
Right. And so to try to reverse those is really impossible from my perspective. So then the other pushback is they think that when egg meets sperm, that is conception, right? That is a human being. Mm-hmm. And so the argument then is these contraceptives are impacting that egg meets sperm, right? So a fertilized egg, where we've gone through 300 studies. The one that everybody points at is that being the case is from 1964, right? So all the new studies show that the drugs are so good now that egg and sperm meet very, very, very rarely. I mean, you have a higher likelihood of dying in a car accident this year than egg meeting sperm and it being aborted with with this drug.
Really?
Right?
And by this drug, do you mean birth control?
Birth control. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Now, let's say sperm does meet eggs successfully. Like, people have a lot of different opinions on this, right? If like the day after, is that a human being or not? Like, some would say no, and some would say yes, though, right?
Yeah, and I would say yes.
Oh, you would?
Yeah,
okay.
I would. And from my perspective, that's a human being. And so we should try to protect that human being at all costs. Mm-hmm. And so what the evangelical right are saying is, okay, well, if you think that's a human being, then and we need to protect that human being, and you have a drug that has a very small chance of aborting that human being, then you shouldn't use the drug.
Okay.
Right? And I'm saying that we take risks every single day. I'm sitting here with you, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we are 4 feet from each other, right? And so there is a possibility that you have COVID, now I have COVID, and there's a possibility that I die from COVID because I'm having this conversation with you. There's a chance that I drove here. There's a chance that when I drive home that I die in a car accident.
Yes.
Right? We make decisions every single day that put us at risk, but we make decisions for our best outcome, right? And so my argument is that there is a massively small, maybe 1 in 10,000 chance that fertilized egg gets destroyed. And they're saying, well, it's a 1 in 10,000. Here's the other stat that people don't want to talk about. In the first 4 weeks after of gestation, meaning the first 4 weeks after fertilized egg, if you have wine 2 or 3 times a week, it is 10x more likely to create a miscarriage than that drug. 10x. And so if you're going to be against a birth control pill, right, then you should be also against anybody in their reproductive years having wine.
Wow, that's something.
Right? And so there's this sacred cow
right,
that we just can't get around, that I'm saying could be the end of abortion. If we could just get these women on contraceptives, we could end abortion the way that we're seeing it now, right? Yep. And so why? I mean, the people from the right who think I hate abortion and the people on the left who say I hate unplanned pregnancies, man, can't we all get together and say we should get these women on contraceptives?
Yeah.
From 1980 to today, abortion has been cut by half. From 1980 to today, there's massively more women on contraceptives, and the contraceptives are significantly more effective than they were back in 1980. And so there is a perfect correlation between contraception and abortion. And so for me, I take a pragmatic approach that says, if we want to reduce abortions, let's get women on contraceptives. And by the way, believers, it gives you an opportunity to engage them.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You're not yelling at them on a street corner. You're engaging them. Let's engage them. That's what we're called to do. And let's do the merciful thing, which is to keep them from having an abortion.
Yes.
That to me feels Christ-like.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that viewpoint was not popular in all of the pregnancy care center circles.
Oh, no. We got blown up pretty good by most pregnancy center folks that said we are worse than Planned Parenthood. We are worse than the folks doing the abortions.
Whoa.
Yeah. So they have a pretty vitriolic reaction
Because
to
they
that.
felt like you were compromising on what should have been a very clear and very hard line.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's man, that speaks to, I think, maybe another one of those differences between nonprofit and for-profit, right? I feel like you tend to have less very clear and very hard lines on the for-profit side and a little bit more of a pragmatic approach to whatever the issue may be. But now half
But let me say, there are very clear lines biblically,
right, yeah.
but not on this.
Exactly.
Right.
I totally agree with that.
And so, when we go through our discernment process, we talk to lots of pastors and said, hey, what are you all feeling about this? One pastor, and I won't mention his name, is a pastor that everybody knows, one of the most famous, the Pope of pastors. And he said, you should absolutely do this. You should absolutely do this. And so I think it's Romans 14 basically said, he uses Romans 14, I believe it's the right verse. He said, look, if it's not specifically spelled out biblically, we can disagree, and we should be okay with disagreeing. So, and biblically, it says, hey, some of you want to eat meat, and some of you don't want to eat meat. Let's not fight over eating meat, right? Some of you want to take Sabbath on Saturdays, and some of you want to take Sabbath on Sundays. Let's not fight about when we take over Sabbath.
Yes.
These are things that we should not let get in the way of us believers. Yet, there's a hard, fast line on this contraception thing that I feel like is dividing when it should be uniting. And I do, we've got a lot of people approach us from the middle of the political spectrum. I was like, man, I love this. So we had an article in the Washington Post, front page article about what we were doing on this, and we got tons of good feedback on this,
wow.
and so including one of the top 10 billionaires in the world, a name you would know that they forced us to keep confidential because they don't want them, people knowing that they're investing in our organization. But they're like, hey, I saw this. I'm not a believer, but I believe in getting, women access to contraception to reduce unplanned pregnancies. And that's something I'm willing to put money into. And so they invested in the organization. This is like one of they walked through our offices. It was a surreal experience.
Billionaire himself?
Billionaire, yeah.
The guy himself?
Yeah.
Wow. That's very cool. Is the pushback again on contraception? Is it that you would be offering it whereby assuming that kind of giving license for people to go have sex outside of wedlock, is that the problem? Or is the problem there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that a life happens and that birth control kills that life?
Both.
It's both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of those two arguments resonates, in different depending on the person that you talk to, but those two are the two pieces of primary pieces of pushback that we get. Yeah.
What was the work? What was the actual work there at the Pregnancy Care Center? Is it offering support? Is it offering health care? Like, what is it trying to talk people out of abortions? What was the work there?
Yeah. So, our let me tell you what our vision was for this. And it was two ways that you'd enter right into the door, right? You get an appointment. One is you think you might have an STD. Okay. So if you have an STD, you are by definition having sex. And what we found is that of every 10 that came in, 2 were on contraception, 8 were on contraception. 4 of the 8 will get pregnant in the next 12 months, and 2 of those will have an abortion. Right? Okay, so that's the math. And so what we were trying to do is getting the 8 who weren't on contraception so they wouldn't get pregnant, so they wouldn't have abortions. Right? That's the first way. The second way is you are pregnant and you don't know what to do. Right? And there's a host of reasons that you're trying to decide whether to carry the baby or abort. It could be money, it could be housing, it could be, a jerk dad, it could be, we had sexual abuse, we've had, domestic violence, we've had, all kinds of things. And so it's like, hey, let's work through the reasons why carrying is not your number one option, and let's try to help you with those. Right? One of them is I don't have health care. So we provide prenatal care for those. We have referrals to pediatric care, so when you do have the baby. And so we just walk through the issues that you might have in carrying the baby, and hopefully we can resolve enough of those so that you say, hey, yeah, this is something I think I can do, right? And then we provide you with basically a mentor, which is a woman in the community that will walk with you one-on-one through your pregnancy and then up to 2 years after you had the baby to make sure that you are, improving some of the things that you were worried about when you were pregnant, right?
Yeah.
So, and they'll do everything from go to the grocery store to take you to the doctor's office to, just love on you, right? Like you just need somebody to love on you during those really hard times. A lot of times we were the only ones in the room when they were having the baby. Hey, remember pre-COVID, you could have a lot of people in the room, right? But a lot of times we were the only one there. So the father of the baby wasn't there. The mother didn't have any family members who wanted to be involved. And so it's like we were the ones there loving her along the way. So,
man, I'm thinking of...
And that doesn't seem controversial to me, right?
Exactly. Yeah, none of that seems controversial.
But we had people, picketing our facilities and things like that. They're saying, you're misleading women. And it was like, guys, we're just here to help them work through some of these issues. And if they really wanted to have this baby, wouldn't you want them to have this baby? Like, wouldn't you want somebody to help them work through some of those issues? To me, it's yes. There was no misleading. We were just there as a resource for these women.
Who was picketing? The pro-abortion people?
Yeah, pro-abortion people.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. Okay.
So now I've got myself in a situation where I have the pro-abortion people who hate me because they think I'm doing something, and I have these, evangelical right who don't like me because of contraception, and so it's like, hey, the hard battle is down the center. I guess that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I'm not shocked to hear that because that's kind of where we're at now with this country and a lot of issues. But I'm thinking of I'm just thinking there's that song, I think it's Lady Gaga, that says, until it happens to you, you don't know how it feels. I think this is on one of her latest albums. Don't ask me to try to sing it, but that's what I'm picturing, because there's a lot of people that don't know anything about, they've never experienced anything like this. I'm thinking of kind of the more evangelical community that they haven't dealt with these issues. And so you can have strong opinions. You can have some very clear lines and some very strong opinions if it's something you've never come in contact with or had to deal with, But until it happens to you, you don't know how it feels, And I like the approach that you guys were taking. I'm also happy to hear that abortions are half of what they were in the 80s. I had no idea that was the case.
Yeah.
The learnings from your time there, which I am impressed by your willingness to jump in there, considering your background. And I'm sure that was hard, even from that standpoint of having been in for-profit, extremely successful, and then trying to run this nonprofit. Like, I'm sure you had some personal challenges just with all of that. So I'm impressed by your willingness to kind of take your talents and apply it to this area. So I'm sure you had some difficult times, some of which you talked about, but I'm also sure you learned some things, right? What were some of the things you learned during your time there about the challenges at hand, maybe some of which you already talked about, but even kind of personally or leadership lessons or those types of things you learned while you were there?
Yeah. I'll tell you that, it was the middle of October when I was let go. So it's a month and a half, a little bit over a month and a half. So it's still pretty raw. So I will preface all of this with it was still pretty raw. Look, ran a for-profit business where you're basically your only metric for success is profit. I kind of joked with my board at the nonprofit, and I said, hey, listen, I've never had a CEO review. They review one number every year, and it's profit. That's how I'm gauged, right? That's how I'm reviewed. In my 7 years of running the company, I literally never had a CEO review. And so I get into this, and it's a 2-hour CEO review. They had to go over like 40 different variables of what I've done. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Every year?
Every year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Who's going over it? The board?
The board.
Okay.
The board. Yeah. Yeah.
And where was the board, by the way? All in Austin or scattered around?
Scattered around. Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's the details of which may be interesting, maybe not, is what we did was we built we had a new 501c3, which was the state entity, and I was the CEO of the state entity, and we had 4 501c3s that were affiliated. So we had one in Austin, one in Houston, one in Dallas, and one in San Antonio. We had 8 clinics to start. And so 2 representatives from each one of the local regions were on my board. Okay. So if you can imagine that, I'm trying to lead these organizations, but these organizations were also on my board, right? So there's a significant conflict there. I had no authority to do anything at the local level because I can't hold them accountable because they're actually my bosses.
I see.
So that's one of the big friction point.
Yep.
Right.
But did they work at the local level? Did they work there?
One of them
were on the board?
One of them worked there, and one of them was on the board.
I see. But they were both board members on your board that you reported to.
Yes.
Okay. And that structure was set up before you got there?
I set it up. So
okay.
I raised my hand, and I'm the one that goofed it up in the beginning.
Okay. Yep.
You know, I don't know if we would have gotten them all together without that structure.
Right.
The idea was like, hey, let's spend a year working together, so that we can kind of get this thing stabilized, right? And then let's go find an independent board to actually offer some outside expertise. That transition never happened.
I see.
And so that's where the challenge came.
Okay. Yep. And were you advocating for giving free contraception as needed?
Yes.
Okay. And you would fund that through donors, basically, or how would that be funded?
Donors, Medicaid will pay for it as well.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Really?
And then there are some other specialty programs out there.
Okay.
That would pay for it.
If Medicaid is paying for that already, why are not more women on that?
They just don't know. I mean, a lot of these women don't know they can get it for free. They don't have access to really good, health care. They may have never been to an OB/GYN, anytime recently. And so they just don't know. It's a lot of just ignorance of the resources that are out there in the community.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these people who came in could be on Medicaid. One of our services was we'll sign you up for Medicaid if you're eligible. So we'd have hundreds of women every year who we'd actually get signed up for Medicaid because up to that point they hadn't even signed up for it if they were eligible for it. So
I see.
That's one of the services we provide.
Yep. Is part of you relieved that they made the decision kind of for you and moved you on?
Oh yeah. I mean,
really?
it was mad, sad, and relieved.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because you were there
Depending
because you
upon the
felt
day.
like, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because you were there because you felt like this is what the Lord would have you to do, right? It wasn't because like this was your dream to run something like this.
Right.
And so now the Lord has again made it clear you're not supposed to be there right
True.
now. So
that's absolutely true. So you have to believe in His sovereignty, and there's a lot of reflection back of like, okay, what can I have done differently? Right. I'm an 8, right, and so I see a barrier and I run right through it, and that's just the way that I get things done.
Yeah.
Whereas nonprofits kind of they see the barrier, they want to talk about the barrier, they want to analyze, how big is it, how deep is it, it's like, no, let's just go through it, let's run through it, we can do this, let's go,
Yeah.
And so there's just that, and so for me, looking back, it's like, Galatians talks about the fruits of the Spirit, like love, joy, peace, patience, right? Patience is my hard one. So it's there's some sanctification through this as I look back, and it's like, man, I do pretty good with love, joy, and peace. It's the patience part that I really struggle with. And I don't know if Paul put those in order of importance, but
let's say he did.
If he did, patience is pretty high up there, I guess.
Yep.
So there's things I could have done differently, for sure.
Yeah.
The for-profit to the nonprofit is it's a difficult transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about for-profit versus nonprofit. So I mean, maybe we already covered it, but I'm just curious, what can the for-profit group learn from the nonprofit group, and what can the nonprofit people learn from the for-profit people?
Yeah. No, I mean,
both now.
Again, I'm raw into this, and so I probably look a little bit more on what could the nonprofit people look from the for-profit. I think that.
Well, I think there's a lot there, to be honest. With you.
There is.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. And in the for-profit, we get really good at understanding what are the levers of the business that we can pull to increase growth.
Yes.
Right. And you only get there by taking metrics, right? Take data, right? Like, give me data. And in the nonprofit business, when I first walked in, there was like no data. Like we didn't have a clue, like how many women were showing up. We didn't know how many were leaning towards having a baby versus not having the baby. And so at the end of the day, we just didn't know how well we were doing. And so there needs to be an additional focus on gathering that data, one, right? And then knowing what to do with that data, two. Eventually, most of the pregnancy centers out there, and I'm using pregnancy centers just as an example, know how many women come in and how many babies they saved, right? How many women who came in who said, I don't know if I want to carry, and decided to carry, right? But that metric has sub-metrics, right? Like that is a product of how many women walk in the door, how many of those women are abortion-minded versus, hey, I just want diapers, right? And then how many of the abortion-minded women are converted to wanting to carry, right? So there's all these kind of sub metrics that you have to look at, and that's that extra step that I don't think, at least in the pregnancy center world, they're very good at doing, is at one step down of analyzing that data, right? And so nonprofits just need to be a little bit more data driven, in their decision making process, right? They need to know how much does it cost to get a woman into the facility. That's not very, you don't get that from many.
Like what's the cost of customer acquisition, so to speak?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so I think there are some really smart people in the nonprofit space who come from the business world who are trying to instill some of that data into the nonprofit world. I mean, I look at this and I say, hey, listen, we've got all these secular businesses that are creating tons of value, right? I mean, how many times did I get on Amazon yesterday and order stuff, right? Yeah. And that's a secular business, right? Not a faith-based business. If it's anything, it's an anti-faith business, right? And they are creating excellent business models. Why as believers, why can't we build excellent business models and operate in excellence? And we got God behind us. I mean, at least we think we do, right?
Yep.
And so why aren't we operating in an excellent way? And so I think, nonprofits need to be more focused on best business practices. They kind of like look at the business world and they're like, oh, business, secular, no.
Yes.
And actually they say, no, let's take the pieces of that work really well and allow Facebook to go from, my living room to, what it is currently.
Yep.
Right. There's a set of practices that have been used. And so let's use those in the nonprofit world. And they're not widely used.
Yes.
They're not widely used.
Yep. Well, I was thinking too, this scarcity mindset that tends to be common, I think, in nonprofit as well, right? The scarcity versus abundance mentality. That seems to be another thing where they're kind of focused on their own and their own little kind of piece of the world, and think any intrusion on that or inclusion or outreach from that or partnerships can take that away. And in the for-profit world, it's just like, well, if there's an advantage to that, you're going to seriously consider it, right?
Totally.
And
Totally.
go for it.
Yeah.
So,
I think there is this, chicken and egg issue, right? Because a lot of these executive directors are working their tails off, right, to run the organization, and so they don't. And I'm not belittling any executive directors at all. They work hard, but they don't have the time to go out and fundraise, right? Because they have to fundraise to keep the lights on, and because they don't have enough money, they have to work harder in the business, which keeps them from going out and getting a lot more money, which I was saying is like, hey, let's build the metrics so that we could go to millionaires and billionaires and say, we've got a business model now that works, so fund it. Give us a little bit now, we'll execute upon that, and then you'll give us more, right? And so instead of, or in addition to the $20 a month, person donor, which is great. Praise God for $20 a month donors. Like I was going out and getting hundreds, $200,000, $500,000 gifts, right? Because I had the metrics, I had the business model.
I see.
And so, I think that the challenge becomes is like, okay, now you have to execute upon that 500, because that guy who gives you the 500 or that family who gives you the 500, if they're giving you 500, they can give you 10 million.
Yeah.
And not even blink. Right, but you got to execute on the 500.
Yeah,
right?
You have to earn it.
You have to earn it,
and it's a gift when they give you the 10 million or the 500,000. It's a gift, by the way. That's not an investment.
Yeah,
that's a gift.
Yeah, it's a gift.
But people want to know that their money's going to work for them.
Yeah.
So you have to show them the data. Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's a big one.
So it's just that mentality that nonprofits have a really, really hard
Yeah.
time with.
Yep.
And they kind of get caught in this loop.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing on that. How about, let's go back to healthcare.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So you have quite a front row seat to healthcare in America, I think. Well, first of all with VRI, and then most recently with this pregnancy care center. Where do you see the state of healthcare in America today? How would you assess it?
It's a mess. It's an absolute mess.
And why is it such a mess when we're one of the wealthiest, more successful, more cutting edge countries in the world? Why can't we fix why is healthcare a mess in 2020 in the United States of America?
Yeah, because there's no market forces, right? There's zero market forces being played on healthcare right now. Like you can go to the dentist and you're paying it out of your pocket, right? And so you can call the dentist if you want to, and you can figure out what's the cheapest dentist in town. You can figure out what you can go online and see what the quality is. And so you can make that decision in your mind. It was like, how much am I going to pay for the quality that I'm willing to get? For cosmetic surgeries, for LASIKs, all these things that are being paid out of your pocket, the cost is, let's talk about, I can go to get my dog, looked at for the vet for $40, right? I can't step into a doctor's office without it being $250, and I'm sorry, but it's not that different.
Yeah.
It's like, but I'm paying it out of my pocket. And so there's market forces that are associated with that. Right. And so I'm on the dog side.
Yeah. Okay.
On the dog side.
Yep.
So, given that there are no market forces, healthcare is just go crazy. And in addition, healthcare insurance companies actually have an incentive to increase costs, not to reduce costs. So at VRI, I was actually selling into health plans. That was my number one thing. So I was selling into health plans to reduce costs for their most expensive patients. The problem we have is that the Affordable Care Act has something called the medical loss ratio, which means that for every dollar you bring in, a certain percentage of it has to be spent on care, right?
For every dollar you bring in a hospital?
Sorry, for every dollar the plan makes. So so let's say I'm making up a health plan. I'm not using this health plan for any specific reason other than it's well known. Let's just say United Health, right? Biggest health plan in the country. For every dollar that they bring in, so every dollar that me as the insured gives to United, they have to spend 80 to 85 cents of that on my care, on care in general. Let's just say. So let's just say they make $100 million, which is way more than that, right? They have to spend $80 to $85 million of that on the actual care of those patients.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So that is mandated by our federal government. Okay. So if you think about this, the only way for them to make more money is for revenue to go up. The only way for more revenue to go up is that they charge me more. Right? And so they're actually incentivized to increase costs.
Whoa.
It's crazy.
That's insane.
And in addition, there's this incestuous relationship between those insurance plans and the big hospital systems. So, if you think about this, right, there's two major hospital systems in Austin. There's a third major hospital system in Texas. And so really there's only like 4 big hospital systems, and everybody wants to go to those hospital systems. And so the health plan has to pay those hospital systems a pretty good amount of money to take care of the patient, or else the hospital system is going to say, okay, United, we're not going to be a part of your plan, right? And so there's this, they're in cahoots with each other to increase costs. And that's why we're screwed, right? And so let me give you one just quick example. So I work for a nonprofit, which means that they didn't give insurance, which means I had to go on the marketplace, the healthcare marketplace run by the federal government. So I was in a plan, and my daughter, Caroline, had ear infections, right? So she had to get tubes put in her ears. So we go over to Dell Children's, and that she's there for 45 minutes. And I know this because I'm texting back and forth with my wife. How's she doing? She just got in. She just got out. So from the time she walked in to the time she got out of the hospital was 45 minutes. That procedure was $8,000 for 45 minutes. And I was on a high deductible plan, so I had to pay $8,000 for this.
And the inventory required to perform that procedure or the raw materials
Zero.
didn't cost. Oh, zero?
I mean, it was probably, the tubes in her ears are probably $5 or something. I
Holy
mean, it's
cow.
they're just little rubber tubes.
So your expense was labor.
Yeah, labor.
Quote unquote labor, but like what else was
in the
it?
room, right? You,
Yep.
you had to rent the room out. And so I'm like, hold on a second, right? Like I even asked before how much this was going to be, and they couldn't tell me how much it was going to be, right? And so I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm sure it's not that bad, it was $8,000. The other thing that was really weird is they said it was an inpatient procedure, which means you stay in the hospital, right? Versus an outpatient procedure, which is you go to the hospital and you come home. She clearly went to the hospital and came home after 45 minutes, yet they refused to make it an outpatient procedure. It was an inpatient. And by making it an outpatient, they could charge you for the room over an overnight stay, right?
By making it an inpatient, right?
By making it an inpatient. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So they did that.
So they did that. And so I'm $8,000 out. And I went and I fought it and I battled it, and nobody would do anything about it. And like, what am I supposed to do? If I don't pay it, guess what? The hospital comes after me, and hurts my credit scores. And
Absolutely.
And so it's a totally screwed up system.
Golly. Okay, explain.
One other quick, interesting data point. I saw data just a few weeks ago from a state who has about 80,000 employees in their state. And
80,000?
80,000
Okay.
employees for the state. They are insured by a big branded one that you would know, big insurance company. And so I saw this data from a company that just does some data mining of these things. And they have, one of them was really interesting where they had 200 people go in for an ACL tear. Okay. So an endoscopic repair of the ACL. Okay. The minimum they were charged was $2,500. Guess how much the maximum was?
20 grand?
$55,000. So they were charged for the exact same procedure, no changes, no differences, the exact same code, between $2,500 and $55,000.
Based on what?
Based upon how much the provider charged them.
Wow.
And so it's just there's no market.
Oh,
forces.
okay. There was different providers that were performing these different services.
One would do
okay.
it for $2,500.
Okay.
One was doing it for $55,000.
Yeah, different hospitals.
Yeah,
right.
Different hospitals,
Gotcha.
but the same state.
Same state and same procedure.
What is that? A 2,000% difference? Or I don't know. I'm bad at math. Somebody can do the math, but like a massive disparity. Mm-hmm. And so if I go down and get Twizzlers at Walgreens, it's going to be the same at Walgreens and CVS and HEB and whatever your grocery store is, like, because there's market for it. We know exactly how much it's going to cost, and that's just not happening in healthcare. So we need transparency. We need to know how much these things cost, and we need to figure out how to make you and I incentivized to actually shop for the services.
Okay.
The weird thing about healthcare is it's the only industry in America that the cost and quality of the good, of the service, are inversely related. Okay, so think about this. The higher the cost, the lower the quality in healthcare. And let me explain why that works. Let's just say you need to get your knee replaced, right? You can go to a guy who does 5 knee replacements a month, right? And or you can go to a guy who does 5 knee replacements a day or a week, like somebody who just does knee replacements. The guy who just does knee replacements is going to be better at doing knee replacements because he's doing it all the time. If he sees something happen, if something comes up, he'd seen it a dozen times, right? And he could fix it. And it'll be fast, right? And he owns his facility. He owns the anesthesiologist. That's all he does all day long. If you go to the guy who does 5 a month, that's not his gig. Like, he does them. He knows how to do them, but it's going to take him longer. He doesn't know some of the things that can go awry, and so it's going to be more expensive. And so you get the cost and quality that are inversely related in healthcare.
Yeah, and where else do you see that? Not very frequently.
No.
I'm looking for other examples, and there's just not.
There's not.
Yeah, there's not.
Probably too much information, but my brother, who's 10 years older than me, had a colonoscopy, and they found some things that they didn't like. And so, all of us have got to go do it, right? And it's, so I call my primary care physician. I was like, okay, who do you go and do this with? And he's like, oh, this is the person that you do it with. And so I called that doc, and I said, okay, how much is this going to cost? And they said, well, my fee is this, but you have to call the anesthesiologist, you have to call the lab, you have to call the thing. And so I get through this, and it's $3,400 for a colonoscopy. And I'm on a plan again where I got to pay for some of these things. And so I was like, that's just crazy. Like, what? Well, then I found this other company that will do it for $1,275. I was like, hold on, $3,400 versus $1,275. What's the difference? And that's all they do all day long. It's all day long. That's what they do, right? And so you can just do it for a lower cost, and you're better at it.
Yes.
Right. And this guy had a 5-star rating, and the other guy that my primary care physician sent me to had a 3.5. So I'm assuming it's going to be better quality and at a lower cost.
Yep.
So that's just a perfect example. Unless we can infuse some market forces into healthcare, we're screwed, and it's going to bankrupt our country from my perspective. That's how passionately I feel about it.
Wow. All right, going back to the incestuous relationship between providers and insurers. You touched on that, but can you clarify that? It's basically, it's incestuous because the insurers actually need the providers to charge more so that they can have their expense level be where it needs to be so that they can go get more clients and increase their revenue.
Yeah. So all these companies are publicly traded. Right?
Which companies? The insurers?
All the insurers are publicly traded.
Okay.
Not all of them, but most of them are publicly traded. So they need more profit. Right? You get more profit by either increasing revenue or reducing costs. You can't reduce costs because the government says you can't.
Yeah.
You have to spend this money on the patient, so you can't reduce cost. So you would think, as me as a health insurance provider, if I wanted to maximize profits, right, I would figure out a way for you to be less costly.
Exactly.
Right? And so I literally had a chief medical officer at one of the largest health plans in the country tell me, he's like, I don't care about diabetics. I was like, what do you mean you don't care about diabetics? He's like, yeah, diabetics don't get really costly until they get old. And once they get old, it's the government's deal. It's not my deal because they get on Medicare, right? They're not expensive until they get on Medicare. And so the commercial health insurance plans, the ones that you and I get our insurance through, don't care about diabetes or the cost of diabetes, at least, because they don't get really costly until
I see
Medicare, right?
Yeah.
And so the government has to pay for the really expensive stuff. And it gets, diabetes gets expensive. You're starting to lose limbs and you're having, kidney, liver failure, things like that, right? So, it's just a weird, funky system.
And the diabetics are good in the short term because it gets their costs up. Now they need their costs at a certain level, but it doesn't get their costs too much. It's just like they need some of those costs, but not too much, and then the big costs come down the road.
Yeah, it's this weird line that you walk in, and the government is trying to put in what they call star ratings, which is like, okay, how many of this is just one example of probably 200 variables that the government looks at, but like, how many of your diabetics actually, get their testing strips every month, and they look at some of those things, and they will rate you. So the government's trying to increase the quality, but it's still, you have that quality cost.
Well, it's like it's almost like a micro socialistic setup in a capitalistic society.
Totally.
You know what I mean? To have your cost be mandated that you need to spend 85 cents for every dollar you bring in it's absurd, and explains a lot. And I didn't know that. I mean, it's such a big deal. I'm surprised that this hadn't been on my radar.
Well, the way you sell it is you say, hey, you want the insurance plans to not make too much profit.
Exactly.
That's how you sell it politically.
But you don't think past your nose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I see that's what you do so that you can sell it, but golly, I mean,
that's the headline, right? And everything politically in his headlines, like, hey, your health insurance plan is making too much money. Well, you want them to make money because that incentivizes them to reduce costs, which incentivizes them to provide you actually better service to you, diabetic or hypertensive or congestive heart failure or whatever it is, right? So that you're less expensive. Like, you want them to do that.
Yes.
And so this is perverting that incentive structure.
But what's crazy about this, do you think that the big thing behind this is politics, and it's just the talking points of what you need to do to sell it? And because it must be that, right? Or is it actually sort of like evil motives, to use a strong term? Because look, I'm not that smart and I'm not that educated. if you say, we're going to have this plan and you're going to have to spend 85 cents for every dollar you're bringing, I can tell you this is what's going to happen. This is not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think past a little bit past your nose, you can see this is going to be the end result. How did we miss this?
I don't know.
And
Politics.
did this come up? It's got to be politics, right? And did this come about? You mentioned the Affordable Care Act. So is this when this was implemented?
I mean, a big chunk of it was, yeah.
Okay.
A big chunk of it.
And that was in the Obama years, correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And apparently the Affordable Care Act is surprisingly hard to unravel?
Surprisingly hard to unravel, yes.
Why is it so hard to unravel? Like, why can't we just make a new law and change it?
I mean, I think you should start fresh.
Yeah.
Just wipe out all of this stuff and figure. And I think George W. Bush had a really good idea with, I think, and I might be wrong, health savings accounts, right? Where it's, let's put money into a savings account that you then can go and spend on your health care, right? And so you become a shopper, which is what we want. But that didn't get very far, and they still have health savings accounts today. But it should be everybody has a health savings account, from my perspective, because it forces market forces.
Right, exactly.
To do that, and so I think we need to go back into that direction. You need to pay more out of your pocket for healthcare, so that you can become a consumer of healthcare and evaluate your consumer decisions the way you would for the brakes on your car.
Right. And get the ACL for $2,500 and get better care than spending $55,000 and getting less good care. Yeah. Makes sense.
The things I'm looking at nowadays are focused on this, which is how do we bring back more market forces to healthcare, right? It is a big issue, and the politics and the big insurance companies and things like that are against you, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier. Once you hit the check hits the bank account for VRI, it gives you the freedom to do stuff that may fail. It gives you the ability to take some risks. And this is one where it's like, look, this is a big issue, but it's one I'm passionate about, as you can probably tell. And somebody needs to be focused on it. Because I think the Republicans like it, except that the insurance companies donate. And basically what I'm saying is you need to rework insurance companies altogether. And we're seeing little pieces of this, interestingly, in the faith-based community. So I don't know if you've seen any of these, but some of these cost-sharing services, have you seen these cost-sharing services like Samaritan?
Samaritans, Christian Healthcare Ministries.
Yeah, shout out to Samaritan. I'm a member. They basically not force you, but like now I have an incentive to go and shop for my services, even though my share is the same every single month. I know that if I'm paying too much, you will pay more, right? These are everybody's, premium, quote unquote, premiums will go up, right? And so now I have a community of people that we have something familiar with, or and both share, right? It's our faith. And that is, and I don't want to screw you, right? I want to go get the best deal, right? Because it's best for all of us, which feels a little socialistic, but man, there's some capitalism in there too, because I don't want to spend too much money on my share every month, right? And so I think they're onto something.
So where are you putting? So it sounds like you've got some recently. Again, you have some time. And you've got this experience and you've got some resources. It sounds like one of the places you intend to apply some of this knowledge and time and maybe even resources is in this area.
Yeah.
And is it what part of this area? Like looking at Samaritan's Purse and helping them kind of scale more, or broadening that model, or maybe you can't talk too much about this because you're on the front end of it, but I'm just kind of curious, what part of this would you be looking to get into or looking to improve?
To do this, you've got to find entities that are paying for health insurance that have an incentive to reduce health spend, right? And so right now, the only entities that are the couple entities or groups that are doing that, one is the uninsured, right? They have a bit of an incentive to find the lowest cost, right? That's just pretty small. The big one is self-insured employers. So if you have employers who are over 500 employees, more than likely they are self-insured, which means they are responsible for their own healthcare costs. right? And you will have a United or Blue Cross Blue Shield or something like that who is administering that, but in reality, your company is paying for your ACL, right? And so there's some companies out there that are saying, hey, I'm using United's network with St. David's here in town, so you need to go to St. David's, right? Employer of, I'm going to pick a company in town, random, Whole Foods, right? Whole Foods employee, you have to go to St. David's because that's who United has as that network provider in Austin. And you're going to pay this amount of money, right? Which is a pretty big, nut, right? So what I'm thinking about is saying, hey, what if you build a network outside of your health plan, right? For colonoscopies and ACL tears and hip replacements and gallbladder things, of people who just do that, right? And they're really good at it and it's really low cost, that don't want to work with United and Blue Cross Blue Shield or whoever, because the working with a health plan is really hard, and it's really costly, and it takes forever to get reimbursed. And so they would prefer 70 cents on the dollar if you paid them in cash versus going to a health plan. Meaning, if a health plan
provider
would,
okay,
yeah.
Okay.
If a health plan would pay you $100, you would take $70 in cash over that $100 from the health plan, because there's just so much cost associated with getting it from the health plan.
I see.
So can you build a quote unquote network outside of the health plan's network, of specialty providers that can take a big chunk of the costs away from the employer? So let's just say you're Whole Foods and you have an employee who needs to get a colonoscopy. You can do it through the St. David's system. I'm just saying St. David's because that's the big one here in town in Austin. You can go through the St. David's system and it'll cost you $3,400, employer, Whole Foods. Or you can send them to this other provider, which will do it for $1,275, and you just save now $2,000 on your colonoscopy. And you do that 200 times over your employees or your employee spouses, and you're saving tons of money.
And this other provider that they would go to get the cheaper colonoscopy would essentially be your network or your company, correct? In theory here. Okay. And
more of a network, right?
Okay.
Because you don't want to own all of those, I don't think. Maybe you do, but you want to reach out to all the. This is we're using colonoscopy, which is kind of a funny example, but it's like you're looking for all the providers of colonoscopies in Austin, right? And you're saying, how much will you do it for?
I see.
All in, right?
Yep.
I don't want to have to go to 4 different people to ask, like, how much will it cost to do a colonoscopy with you? And they'll say $1,000 or $1,275 or $1,500. And then the great thing about that is you go back to the guy who says, $2,000. And you say, hey, I've got somebody who will do it for $1,275. Will you do it for $1,100? And so you actually get some, bidding against each other.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's a way to do it. It's going to take some time and some serious money to build those networks. There's a couple companies out there that have kind of started building those networks. And so instead of doing that from a startup, I'm probably going to raise some money to go and do that. And invest in one of them, acquire or invest in, help run. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm pumped about today.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I was just going to ask, how do those networks not already exist? But you're saying they do already exist.
They're starting to.
There's just room for growth.
Yeah, they're starting to. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah. Enough providers are getting so annoyed with health plans that they're like, I'm just going to take cash. Like, if you want to come and pay me in cash, I'll do that, but I'm not doing health plans anymore.
I see.
And so you're seeing, it's not at the tipping point. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that you're starting to see more of these pop up.
Yeah. And that's why at a real micro level, some providers don't take health insurance, right? They don't want to screw with it.
They don't want to screw with it.
That's why, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All the admin and all the everything that's needed to do health. Oh, I see. Okay. And in your scenario, does Whole Foods need to pay into your network a little bit to have the ability to send people there when they want to, or it's available and they just pay for it when they need it?
It's available. They pay for it when you need it, but the network takes a percentage of the cost savings.
Cost savings or the cost?
Cost savings. So let's just say that,
there's some assumptions there that would be needed then.
There are some assumptions that will be needed.
Okay.
So let's just say the 3,400 colonoscopy has been going for 1,200, so you save $2,200. The network would take a percentage of that savings.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So that's where you intend to put some time and resources.
I think
next.
so. That's what I'm excited about right now. Is I want to go after a big problem.
Yeah, well, this is a big problem
that impacts people's lives, and
Yep.
this is one that impacts people's life. It is a big problem, and so let's go after it and let's see if we can figure it out.
Yep.
And it is a monumental task. I mean, it is.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
a huge one. I mean, healthcare is a $3 trillion industry in this country, right? And so, it's big, which means you can create a lot of value by even taking, if you can convert 1% over that or 2%
Yep.
to more of a cash network. I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that you're creating in value. So it's take a big, a big industry, find a niche that could be, if the niche turns into something that's massive, then you're talking about billions of dollars as opposed to hundreds of millions. So
yes, exactly.
that's kind of my approach to this. And
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see if we find that it works.
I like your chances, man.
No, thanks.
Yeah. How about?
I'll call you for an investment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting, man. Shoot, I'd love to be involved in some way for sure. I am curious what you learned at VRI. What did that experience instill in you that wasn't there prior? It's just such a big, for one of your first deals out of the gate coming out of college, it just strikes me as such a big success that probably has you believing certain things that maybe you didn't believe or know or see to be true, or having had experience firsthand prior to that.
Yeah.
What were some of those things?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it made me understand, realize, appreciate that God has given us all different skills, right? And they don't tend to show up always on GPA. And I'm talking to some high school students who, through this pandemic, they're out of school, they're working remotely, they're freaked out about college, they think that college is the ultimate thing, GPA, which means they have to have the highest GPA. I just feel like, I'll tell you, in high school, I had an okay GPA, like a 3.3 or 3.4 or something. My SATs were okay, 1,200 or something like that. They were all right. But I was never like the smart kid, right? And it was always like the chip on the shoulder, like not being the smart kid. But what I've come to realize is that God has gifted me in different ways than the quote unquote smart kids, right? And so I just have come to appreciate the fact that you may not have a 4.0 GPA. You might have a 2.5 GPA, but that doesn't mean you're not smart. Let's expand that definition, right? Because you may be really good at something else that doesn't require memorization. I found that all the people with the high GPAs could just memorize. Like they just had a really amazing ability to memorize, right?
Yep.
And that is such a small part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, right? Is memorize. You're a good conversationalist. Can you see that in your GPA in high school or college? Probably not, right? But God has gifted you with being conversationalist. God has gifted me with the ability of having a vision for something and getting people to follow it, right? It's more of a storyteller, right? And you can't calculate that in GPA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Chris, who was my business partner at VRI, was probably the top 10 of our class at Stanford. Like wicked smart, and he was the operations guy, right? Like he made sure things could happen, but he couldn't sell.
Okay.
Right. And I was the sales guy, and I couldn't operate, right? We were just given different skill sets, and praise God, because find those complementary people in your life to go out and do things with, because you need to understand what you're not good at, right? And so a part of me is like, it's kind of a blessing for some of these kids who don't have a 4.0 GPA, because you don't go into a situation thinking that I'm right and prove me wrong. I go into a situation thinking I'm wrong, prove me right.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that's just a blessing. You just have a different approach to solving problems that I think is, I don't know, I think you get better outcomes.
Yes, I love that. And even going in a situation with, here's what I'm thinking, show me where I'm wrong. I mean, that's such a good way to go into a situation, like strong opinions held loosely, But this idea of the intellectual and smart, I was just listening to the CEO, I think it was the founder and CEO of Whole Foods,
John Mackey.
John Mackey.
He was on Rogan.
He was on Joe Rogan's
recently.
podcast, and I was here, and he was saying that I haven't listened to the whole thing, but he was saying that in the capitalist societies, intellectuals tend to frown on the success of capitalists because they're not intellectual, they're not as smart, and yet in a capitalist society, they're kind of the heroes, right? You think of like the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk of this world, and like they get lots of fame and glory and money, and yet they're not as smart as like all these intellectuals, and that can be held against them a lot of times from the intellectual side. And so they would tend to be anti-capitalist society partly for that reason.
Yeah.
That never
I mean, I would
occurred to
say
me.
that they are not as, smart people tend to be very linear, right? Like, here's the problem. Here's how to get to the solution. Let's think linearly, right? I hear Bezos and I hear Musk and I hear Gates, and like there's a smart with a creativity that's added to it that kind of gets them thinking, and it's like they think about things that in ways that we don't think about things, and so it's like mixing those two things together, and you have something brilliant, and you could have somebody with a 2.5 GPA make as much money as somebody with a 4.4 GPA or whatever you can get up to nowadays. I don't even know, but and that's the beauty of capitalism.
Yes.
Right. And so, I think he's right.
Yep.
The intellectuals want the brains to be the number one driver of your success.
Yes.
And it is the number one driver of success. It's just may not be the right versus the left brain. Right?
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's kind of an interesting thing
it's
that
self-serving too.
Most of the socialists, the Marxists, those folks are the intellectuals.
They are.
They are the intellectuals, and they're the ones that should be thinking through this and saying, "Hey, listen, let's look at the 40 times over the past couple hundred years where this has been tried and has failed. Right?
Yes,
this doesn't work."
Yep.
So,
what's also pretty self-serving too. It's easy to see that because, like, if I am the intellectual and I am the 4.0 or the 4.4, and I am the one poo-pooing on the others that aren't as smart as me, and I want this society to be built around me because I'm so smart. It's like, dude, how is this not so selfish? How is this not just self-serving? Like, can't we all just see that?
Yeah. I think Joe is a perfect example of this. He's not a 4.4 guy.
But he's smart in other ways, though.
But he is. But
he's extremely smart.
He's got curiosity.
Yes,
he's got, and that's what I'm saying is like smart based upon your just ability to process data in the moment, which is mostly what your GPA is, from my perspective. It's just not a very good determinant of how you're going to end up.
Yes.
I'd be interested. When you get on Joe Rogan, ask him what his GPA is. I bet you wasn't a 4.4. I bet you he was a middle of the road kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe he may not even went to. He probably didn't even go to college.
I don't even think he went to college. But I think,
and it's like, praise God, like those are the people that we want to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's actually a great example because I think he's extremely smart. It's just in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's very smart, and also he kind of plays himself dumb. I think he's smart by doing this too, because he's always like, I'm not a political expert. Learn from the experts. But then he gives his opinion, and like more people follow it than the experts.
Yeah.
So I think he's extremely smart with like that interaction level, that conversational level, but it's not like the hard science. It's not like he's a great scientist or mathematician or writer or anything like that. So, or an intellectual, but he's smart in different ways. I think it's a great example. Business principles going forward, either conscious or subconscious. Like if you get into this kind of next bit, like what are some of those things that you just know you're going to act on? They might not be written down. Might not even be really clarified, but like, how would you go about that? What would you believe to be true? Like you're only going to get involved with something if it can scale, or, you always conquer, facing your challenges kind of head on. Like what are some of those kind of, again, conscious or subconscious business or leadership principles that you abide by now?
Yeah. And I think the question around like, what am I going to get involved in is a really good one because it's forced me to actually, write some of this stuff down. Like, okay, how do you keep being an Enneagram 8? You tend to jump into things quickly, like knee jerk into things because you just want to go as opposed to like pause and wait and evaluate. One is, I'm a man of faith. I think my faith has got to play a role in what I do, at least be accepted in wherever I go. And so that's probably the number one priority. Number two, it's impactful. We have big as Jim Collins has, big, hairy, audacious goals, right? Something big and impactful, and it's got to impact people. Like I love, my brothers and sisters who are doing, security software and things like that that are impacting, people. But I want to directly impact people, right? Like, I think this health insurance thing is a direct impact on people. I think VRI, is a direct impact on people. Just some crazy stories there where you're just like, wow, like we made an impact, right, on people's lives. Like that's really, really important. And I think it needs to have the ability for me to lead a team. I mean, I think that God has gifted me in leading a team. And so I really want to lead the team to go about doing this. So I'm not a very good passive investor kind of guy. I need to be involved in the organization to help them grow. So those are the things that I'm looking at. Those are pretty broad, but I prefer to start broad and narrow it down. I think healthcare is probably where I'm going to end up, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, Nashville is a big base for healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, I love Nashville. Nashville was actually on my list of places to live after Cincinnati.
Okay.
It wasn't far enough south. I wanted a little bit more warmth. And, the fishing in Texas is a little bit better than the fishing in Tennessee, although could be debatable.
I don't know anything about fishing. That sounds boring.
It's my other passion.
Oh
so.
Yeah. Where do you fish in Texas? Do you get down to the ocean?
No, I'm a lake fisherman. So,
okay.
They're
Lake Travis
Travis and Austin, and fortunately in Texas, and I know in Tennessee too, you've got some of these big ranches that have quote unquote ponds that are actually lakes.
Sure.
They could be dozens or hundreds of acres, lakes in the middle of their big ranches, and so I've got some folks that I can go and do that too. So that's a lot of fun.
I think you made a good decision with Austin for sure. I mean, I love Nashville. It's home for us. But the weather's a little better in Austin, I'll be honest. Like, this is a good example. It was getting pretty chilly and rainy in Nashville, and we fly out here, and it's going to be 70 to 75 degrees and sunny all week, which I know maybe it's not always like this. But I know Austin tends to be a little warmer than Nashville.
Yeah, no, the weather's great. And I can deal with the summers, so... Summer's a little warm, but
as I've gotten older, I've grown to be able to deal with the hot summers better, and I dislike cold weather more and more. Every year I get older.
Yeah.
Being in I'll throw you a left curve here, but being in the healthcare space, what are your thoughts on COVID? What are your thoughts on what we're dealing with, how we're handling it?
Yeah, man.
All of the above.
It's a great question because I wish we would have taken a little bit more of a war approach on this. I think that there are clearly people who are more impacted than others. You and I, if we get COVID, the probability of us dying is next to zero, right? I mean, it's not going to happen unless you have some comorbidities that I don't know about. But, most of the time we're going to survive it. And so what I think we should have done is we should have locked down these nursing homes. We should have put everybody who works in those nursing homes in hotels all by themselves. The hotels are empty anyway. Let's put them there. Let's pay them combat pay, because they will be living and breathing these nursing homes for a long time, and the government should have subsidized that. You could do the same thing for people who have diabetes and other things. Like, we need to lock them down and
lock them down in their homes potentially,
or get them in hotels or get them somewhere else, where they're all together. Yep. No outside influences, no bringing viruses in. My dad had unfortunately a stroke in March. So he lost the entire left side of his body, the ability to move, so it's paralyzed. And he's been in a nursing home since March and hasn't been able to see anybody. But you have these people coming in and out of the nursing home who are bringing COVID in. So he's had COVID in the nursing home. His entire wing of this nursing home got it. They've had 6 people die so far in his nursing home. And it's like, man, why are these people going out into society and then coming back and bringing it back into these nursing homes? Are there people, I'm not sure there are, but let's ask, are there people who are willing to treat this like war? Like, we are at war with this thing. And so therefore you will be in, the United States equivalent of a military base in Afghanistan, and you will be quarantined, and you'll be taking care of these people, and you'll make a ton of money doing it, and you'll be doing an amazing good deed for these people. I think there are enough people, especially with all the craziness with jobs and things like that, who are willing to do that, that you could make that work, and the government could have subsidized it. I think, as opposed, and then let everybody else go do their thing, right?
Okay.
And don't close down the economy. Don't shut down the restaurants. Don't shut. It's. And I think that's probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
Right? I think the hospitals could have handled it. Sweden, I know they're reversing some things already, but Sweden is doing it, and their death rate is no worse than Texas. And so
Sweden is doing what?
Sweden is basically has an open economy, right? Never shut down.
Right, exactly.
And I think in the last couple of weeks with this second wave, they've started to do some masks and social distancing and stuff like that. But why not just open the economy and let people do what they need to do? And then if you need to be quarantined, quarantine yourself. Like it's easier said than done, clearly. But I think that the rest of us should go and continue on with our daily lives. I think that's, if there was a bit more of a coordinated quarantine, laser-focused quarantine effort, I think we could have done better.
So better with quarantining people with vulnerability to COVID, pre-existing conditions, elderly, nursing homes, diabetes, those types of things.
Yeah.
Better with quarantining them and having them be in a bubble along with their care providers.
Yes.
For what, all summer, a couple of months, a couple of weeks, just as long as it's needed?
As long as it's needed.
As long as it's needed. Okay, so you have that, which is like a more kind of strict, more quarantine, just a more definitive lockdown for the susceptible, but then also a more kind of free and open market for the healthy.
Yeah.
The younger and the ones less vulnerable. Yeah.
I'm by far an expert on this, but it seems to me like we could have had a more coordinated effort on the vulnerable, keeping them away.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
And let the rest of us continue on, because I think as we're seeing, and it's hard to tell what's fake news and what's real, but depression, anxiety, suicides, all these things are skyrocketing. We just saw Tony Hsieh, who CEO of Zappos. I don't know if you've seen this, but he basically sold Zappos to Amazon for $1.2 billion. He was CEO until August, and he has spiraled out of control since then because he was in this pandemic, lockdown place. He got into drugs, and it ended up he died in a house fire that looks like he said it. And so it's just this is Tony Hsieh, who's widely known by the business community as one of the most innovative thinkers on the planet. And he, got taken down by this, at least partially, right? It's like there's so much collateral damage as a result of keeping these people in homes.
Oh my gosh, when was that house fire?
Like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Tony
Hsieh?
Tony Hsieh. Do you know Tony Hsieh?
Well, I don't know him personally, but of course I know who you mean.
Yeah. He died. There you go. 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, but the house fire was 2 weeks ago. Died on Friday.
The cause was injuries suffered in a house fire on November 18th in New London, Connecticut, according to Megan. Wow. He stepped down as chief executive in August after 21 years with the company, after selling shoes online in 99. I always thought Hsieh and Zappos was such a great story. I did not know he died. And you're saying it looks like he set the fire.
Look up the same Hsieh and then say... just house fire and see what comes up on Google, because I know the most recent articles are detailing that house fire and his association with drugs.
New details emerge. Tony Hsieh, he died later after sustaining injuries. The cause of the fire is still under investigation, though a coroner said Hsieh's death was accidental. In a statement to Forbes, Hsieh's father: "We are so deeply grateful for that pouring of love." He retired at Zappos in August.
Maybe look up Hsieh and drugs.
When did he get into the drugs? Was it after he had sold?
It's hard to tell, but it feels like within the last year.
You think it was a combination of selling his company and then COVID and everything?
A spiral of alcohol, drugs,
click on
and
that, the Wall Street Journal there.
It's crazy.
About 2 weeks before, Zappos.com co-founder Tony Hsieh died from injuries in a November fire. His closest friends got a phone call. Tony's in trouble. The caller told Philip, the founder of an electronic dance music group that frequently performed at Hsieh's parties. because of the pandemic, Mr. Placina hadn't seen Mr. Shea since he, Atlanta tech executive.
Yeah, he says the caller described it as the escapist tendency, including increasing drug and alcohol use.
Oh, man. I mean,
it's
but your point stands. This is happening all over the place.
Yeah, it's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
So, man, but how do you do the calculus of that?
Mm-hmm.
All these people who are dying from, suicides, or maybe not even dying, but having anxiety and depression and all these things.
Right.
All these kids who aren't in schools, right?
Yep.
Who aren't able to do what these kids should be doing in schools. I mean, I saw something from Fairfax County, which is a pretty well to do county right outside of Washington, D.C. The number of Fs in classes has increased by 80%.
Golly.
And so these kids
I'm
are
not shocked to hear that at all.
impacting.
Yeah.
And so what could we have done differently to,
Yep.
get the folks who are really high risk,
Yep.
bubbled, and that
Keep them
stinks.
safe,
Like
yeah.
that's awful. And instead of the trillion and now probably another trillion on top of it, could we have used that money to be a little bit more laser focused on the ones who needed it?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas why it's affecting even some healthy people more than others? I mean, I have friends that I have a friend that had almost every disease or every kind of issue on the planet, and she got it, and it was no problem at all. And then I have another friend who's a little older than I, but very good shape, and he got it and almost died.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know.
Any idea
man.
why it's having such a different effect?
I think it's got to be something with. I mean, clearly it's human biology, or it's the strains of the of the virus. You got to think some of these strains are not as impactful as others, if that's even the case. I mean, I think there's still theories about that, and then there's something about. I thought I was totally screwed because originally they did a study in, I think it was Germany, that said if you are bald, you have 4 times more likelihood of dying from COVID than if you weren't. And they thought it was because of the testosterone, and maybe it's not the testosterone, but whatever one of the male hormones is that leads to hair loss, also is the fuel for this virus.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if they got debunked or not, but
okay.
It was like one of those things. Like we got all of these theories that I don't think anybody's really figured out yet. Until and probably may never figure out if we get this vaccine to come and people start taking it, and this virus, oh please God, disappears. Right?
Yeah, for sure. What's time it goes? We just heard on the Uber ride here yesterday that South by is canceled again in 2021.
Oh, really? That's a shame.
So, I mean, it was canceled in 2020 and 2021. I mean, my gosh. I mean, this thing's been going on for a while now, I mean, it's like, man, we need to see an end in sight. Are you optimistic about the vaccines, or do you have concerns there?
I don't have any vaccine concerns. I shoot me up. Well, I'll do it. I mean, I prefer to do that than, having to worry about wearing masks all the time.
Yeah.
Or not going to restaurants or whatever.
Yeah. How do you feel Texas and Austin has been handling it? Decently, or?
Well, I don't know if you saw, but our mayor, this one was interesting. Our mayor, put a video out from Cabo San Lucas telling everybody in Austin that they shouldn't be traveling.
I did see that. Isn't that just the dumbest thing?
I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. But it's Austin. We're full of hypocrisies here. So, I think we're doing okay. I mean, I think Texas is one that it's Texas. Right. And everybody, what is the stereotype of Texas is we do whatever the hell we want to do.
Exactly.
Right. And so given we do whatever the hell we want to do, which means goes and has a good time. But I will tell you that while it's the number one in the country for the number of virus infections, I think it's way down there in terms of deaths. I mean, it's.
Oh, Texas is number one in the country in terms of infections?
Yeah. But I think deaths is I don't quote me, but it's like 10th or something like that in terms of deaths.
Yeah, I'm not shocked to hear that at all.
So I think a lot of people are getting it, but I don't think,
The politicians that have gotten themselves into trouble over this COVID. Okay, the mayor of Austin, Democrat. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
Recently at this party with
French Laundry,
sitting around the table with no mask on, and he's saying that you shouldn't do this, and then he goes and does it. I'm thinking of Pelosi. It was in California, the haircut. Why is it the left that keeps stepping in it? Is it because they're the ones that are a little bit more vocal about what you shouldn't be doing and lockdowns and staying away from people and masking everyone to begin with? And then just by nature of them being more outspoken, they're going about their lives and they're making some missteps? Or like, why does it seem to be that it is the left?
I wish I was smarter on this, man. I really do, because I don't understand why you have to say one thing and do another thing.
Right.
We're hypocritical by just being in a Genesis 3 world. But this one is like, use your brains, that you can't say one thing and do another when you have 1 million Twitter followers or you're on the nightly news every night. Like, you just can't do it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better theory on this, but I try to stay out of politics for a reason, because it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't disagree. What else you want to talk about, Andy? Did we cover everything here?
Man, I think we got some good stuff. How much time do we have? Do we have enough?
We have. I mean, I've got a few more minutes. I think I covered most. I did want to hear about some of your investments. Did you have success there? You mentioned doing some investments in other ventures.
Yeah.
Is that something where can it really work if you get just the right deal with just the right people, or did you find any kind of success there?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that this is one of the places where capitalistic society doesn't work very well, especially for the low income. I get access to the best deals because I put together a really good deal. I really had a really good deal. And so people will come to me and folks like me for their next investment. And so inevitably, the ones at the top get access to the best deals, which increases, their ability to generate wealth. And so that is one of the parts of the capitalistic society that just doesn't work well for, the guy who's making $15 an hour at McDonald's doesn't get access to the deals. And actually the government says you can't have access to those deals because you've got to be worth a certain amount of money. So to make it, I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but to invest in a private equity, a venture capital, growth equity deal, you've got to be worth a certain amount of money.
You talking about like an accredited investor?
An accredited investor.
Okay, yeah.
So the $15 guy can't be an accredited investor, and therefore he doesn't have access to the same deals that I have.
Yes.
Right? One, by just legislation, regulation, and two is he just doesn't have access. And so there's, that's one part of the capitalistic society that I feel like, the ones who have the wealth are going to be able to grow their wealth faster, and therefore you're going to have the disparity between rich and poor.
Yep.
And in fact, I'm one where I could look. I'm okay if you tax me more. I just would prefer to you use the tax money in an effective way, right? And so when I see, I saw last year that the Navy filled up one of its Navy ships with this green energy fuel or something like that, and it cost $40 million, whereas the normal tank up would have been $3 million. I'm like, dude, you're spending 37, and maybe the numbers may be a little off, but it was tens of millions of dollars more
for a statement
to do this for a statement.
It's a statement.
And I'm like, that to me is a stupid way of using money.
Yeah, it's
and
absurd.
so don't tax me more. Don't take more of my money to do stupid stuff with this money. So you see how inefficient the government is.
Well, that's not going to change anytime soon.
And it's not.
So,
not, right?
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like the United States needs to bottom out before before somebody actually does something. And unfortunately, there's no fortitude to do it within either party to do something differently.
Have you seen the documentary Planet of the Humans?
No, I haven't.
On Netflix? I'm sorry, it's on YouTube. It's free on YouTube. Just check it out. It's good. It talks about how that renewable energy is not so renewable after all.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the solar and wind stuff. I mean, that stuff lasts for about 10, 20 years tops, and you have to rebuild it all over again. And to build it, it takes fossil fuels and other things in the earth that are precious resources, basically.
Yeah.
It's really not as sustainable as.
And I don't have a super, hard line on renewables or global warming or things like that. I feel like if you fall on kind of the right side of the spectrum, you're supposed to say global warming is not as bad, and it is human induced and things like that. And I don't have a super strong line on it. I'm just saying, what I would say is, let's let the innovators go innovate.
Yeah.
Right. If I were the president of the United States, I would say, hey, I'm going to put up $1 trillion. If somebody can figure out a way to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, right, I'll give you $1 trillion or whatever the number is, right? Like big enough so that some really smart people can go after it. And if Elon Musk, for God's sakes, can figure out how to get us to Mars, which it looks like he might be able to do, somebody should be able to figure out how to suck this stuff out of the atmosphere or do something, right? And there was the CTO of Microsoft when it first started that came out and said, people could be able to do it. There's a way chemically to get the carbon out of the atmosphere. And so I was like, instead of us, nobody's going to stop eating steak, which is, the number one, cows, doing their thing is the number one source, right? Nobody's going to stop driving cars. Nobody's going to, and why are we penalizing mostly the poor by transitioning to this really expensive energy source?
Yep.
As opposed to doing something inexpensive like coal and nuclear and things like that, right? Or screwing up our waterways because we want to dam all these rivers to create hydro, right? It's like, why don't we just say, hey, innovators, go innovate? Elon Musk just did it with NASA, right? It was some crazy number where NASA was going to be like, I don't know what it was, $20 billion or something like that to build no, maybe it was more than that, but whatever it was like a huge number to get somebody to the space station without the shuttle, right? So to build a new shuttle, and Elon Musk did it for like 1/10 of that.
Yes. Well, isn't that an example of capitalism working?
Yeah. Just let's let the innovators go and do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not an expert on global warming at all. I mean, it seems to stand to reason that, hey, we weren't here always and we're not going to be here forever. And if the earth is warming up year over year, I'm not shocked by that. Whether we're contributing much to that or not, I don't really know. And it seems to me like if I'm with you, if the issue truly is as big and as bad as some are saying that it is, I kind of feel like there'd be people trying to fix it a little bit quicker than we are.
Yeah, but there's no incentive to. There's no financial incentive to fix it right now.
Well, but
is there?
But there's not. But also there would be if we were clear that the problem is as bad as some say that it is.
Yeah,
I think that's where the issue lies.
I think there's enough people out there that think that the problem is as bad as we say it is. And so why don't the Elon Musks of the world or creative thinkers like that, why aren't they going after this?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, maybe because if you take all the carbon out of the air, all the trees and plants die.
Well, I guess. I mean,
look. I mean, if you look back in L.A. in the '80s, it's a lot better now than it was back then. It's not like everything is heading in the wrong direction, you know. But again, I digress because I'm not an expert here.
I'm not either. I think it's one of these where I do feel like we've jumped to a conclusion without doing the scientific experimentation that we would do
agree with that.
Every other thing that we have come to conclusions on. It's like, okay, let's do a scientific experiment to figure out, is this actually the case amongst the 100 other variables or 1,000 other variables that could be increasing the heat, because I think that's undeniable that it's getting a little bit hotter. I think I'm not an expert, but it sounds like we're getting hotter. There's a hockey stick in carbon in the atmosphere.
Yep.
Are those causal, right? Are those correlated? Or are they not? Let's do some experimentation to figure it out, because there was that much carbon in the atmosphere, I don't know, a dozen times in the past, over the last millions of years. Mm-hmm. And was there a correlated increase in temperature? Sometimes there was, and sometimes there wasn't. So it seems to me that it may not be perfectly correlated.
Yeah.
But let's not screw up our planet.
Yep.
Right?
I'm in full agreement with that for sure.
I consider myself a conservationist. Like, I would like to figure out a way to clean up our oceans, to stop overfishing, to stop, hunting whales, to stop doing some of those things. Like,
full agreement.
I have a problem with people going, and I don't know if I have a moral problem with it, just a gut problem with going over and, killing animals just to kill animals for sport. Like, I just, and as a Texan, it's hard for me to say that, but it's like, man, I just don't get it. Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to Africa?
I haven't.
Dude, it is one of those coolest experiences.
I've heard multiple times that it is.
And you see these lions, right? Prides of lions of 20, right? Just roaming around the plains as if, that is their kingdom. And to think of, somebody coming in and taking out, one of the dads, right?
Yeah,
and you take out a dad, and guess what? All the cubs die because the new lion comes in and kills all the cubs. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I just don't.
Yeah, why? Can't we find something else to do for sport? But you realize that you have more lions in captivity in Texas than exist in the rest of the world combined?
Tigers too, I heard.
Really?
Yeah. That's Texas for you.
That's Texas for you. Yeah. So what's the rest of your life look like? This is Monday morning. You don't have a day job, so to speak, right now. Will you put more time and attention into kind of the next thing that you're thinking about, or will you manage some investments, or what's your week look like?
Yeah, my biggest investments that I'm managing are my kids.
Okay.
So I'm spending lots more time being dad.
Okay, great.
To 2 and a 4-year-old girls who, I just think there's tons of value to having dad in their life full time right now.
Yeah.
When I can be. So, with the pandemic, it's not like I can go and work anywhere. So I'm usually working at home when they're sleeping, and when they're not sleeping, doing dad stuff. Mm-hmm. So, that's been a lot of fun. I'm not sure how long I can do it for, because I think I've colored the same Santa Claus, coloring page, 100 times.
Yeah.
But it's been fun, and I'm looking for investments. And I think I'm just, to me, this stage of life is just kind of waiting on God. As an 8, I feel like my sin has been, let me go do something. Whereas it's, as opposed to that, saying, hey, God, you come and do something through me, right? Use me in whatever way you want to use me while I'm on this planet, right? And that for me has been a bit of a transition in thinking. Kind of back to the selfish conversation that we had earlier. Like it's a normal thing, not a normal, but it's a Genesis 3 thing where we focus on self and what value do we have, as opposed to, or what value do we provide, as opposed to what is God doing through us, right? And it's just a different way of kind of looking at the world, right? So I'm just trying to pause and wait and have some faith and hope that whatever's next will become very apparent.
I think it will. Well, I really appreciate our conversation, man. Thank you so much for your time. This was a privilege to meet you and get to know you a little bit and hear about some of your past experiences and where you might be headed going into the future.
Yeah, thanks.
Man.
Hopefully,
we're in your corner, man.
Hopefully the audience finds some of this valuable. I'm not sure if they will, but
I'm sure that they will. And on that note, any final thoughts for the listeners, or anything you'd like to say as we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think my thing I'm really focused on right now is I'm seeing so many people in pain and hurt, especially during this pandemic, for a variety of reasons. Especially some of these kids, who are really questioning where they fit in this world. And all I would say is, wait on the Lord, rely on the Lord to show you. And if your GPA isn't 4.0, it's okay. I'm a perfect testament to the fact that great GPAs don't turn into great success stories. Find something that you love to do and pour your heart into it. So that would be my kind of closing remark.
Yeah, love it. Andy Schoonover, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.